Hey there, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I've put together a new collection of interesting stories. So whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or just listen in the background, this should be a good one. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, let's start with the first story. It is titled,
I was released from my deployment a day early, and when I came home, I saw my wife and her helpful boss in our bed kissing aggressively. I left without a word, blocked all the cards, and changed the locks. But then something happened that no one expected. Wife's 467 missed calls. You know that feeling when you think you're about to walk into the best surprise of your life, but instead you're walking straight into a horror movie? Yeah. Well, welcome to my Tuesday night from hell. So, there I was, sitting in this cramped airline seat that probably cost more than most people's rent, trying not to lose my mind over the fact that some kid behind me had been kicking my seat for the last 4 hours like he was auditioning for the Rockets. But hey, nothing could kill my mood because I had a secret weapon. I was getting home a whole day early from deployment. 24 glorious hours ahead of schedule, which in military time basically means you've won the lottery and found a unicorn in the same day. The brass had cut us loose early because, and I quote, operational objectives were met ahead of schedule. Translation: we did our job so well that even the army couldn't find a reason to keep us sitting around in the desert eating MREs and pretending to enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, I love serving my country and all that patriotic stuff. But after 6 months of sand in places sand should never be, I was ready to kiss American soil and probably hug the first Starbucks barista I saw. The whole flight back, I kept thinking about Marissa, my wife, my beautiful, supposedly devoted wife, who had been sending me these sweet little care packages and tear-jerking letters about how much she missed me. How she was counting down the days until I came home. How she was planning this amazing welcome back dinner and had been sleeping in my old t-shirts because they still smelled like my cologne. Real Hallmark movie stuff. You know, the kind of romance that makes other guys jealous and makes you feel like maybe you actually won at life for once. I had this whole plan mapped out in my head during that endless flight. I'd grab a cab instead of calling her for a pickup, sneak up to the house, maybe hide behind some bushes like a creep until I could figure out the perfect moment to surprise her. I pictured her face when she opened the door and saw me standing there with my duffel bag and that stupid grin I get when I'm trying to be romantic. She'd probably scream, the good kind of scream, not the there's a serial killer at my door kind. And then jump into my arms like those cheesy military homecoming videos that make everyone cry on Facebook. Hell, I even practiced what I was going to say, something smooth like, miss me or maybe I couldn't stay away another day. I know I'm not exactly Shakespeare, but cut me some slack. I'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes in that tiny military bunk, I saw her smile, felt her arms around me. Heard her whisper, "You're finally home." In that way, that made me forget all about the bureaucratic nonsense and the sand, and the fact that military coffee tastes like it was filtered through a gym sock. The cab ride from the airport should have been my first clue that something was off. Not because of anything dramatic. The driver was actually pretty cool. Some older guy who kept thanking me for my service every 5 minutes, which was nice, even if it got a little repetitive. No, it was me that felt weird. The closer we got to home, the more this strange knot started forming in my stomach. You know that feeling when you're about to take a really important test and suddenly you can't remember if you studied the right chapters? It was like that, except I couldn't figure out what the hell I was supposed to be worried about. Maybe it was just deployment paranoia. 6 months of being on high alert 24/7 will mess with your head in ways you don't expect. Every shadow looks suspicious. Every unexpected sound makes you reach for a weapon that isn't there. And every good thing feels like it might be too good to be true. The army docs have fancy names for it. But basically, it boils down to your brain being convinced that peace and happiness are probably booby traps. But as we pulled into my neighborhood, our neighborhood with all those perfectly manicured lawns and white picket fences that scream suburban dream achieved, I started to relax a little. Everything looked exactly the same as when I'd left. Mrs. Henderson still had those ridiculous garden gnomes that her homeowners association keeps trying to make her remove. The Johnsons still hadn't fixed their mailbox that leans at a 45 degrees angle like it's giving everyone a casual salute. Normal, peaceful home. Then we turned onto my street and I saw our house. My house. The house I'd been dreaming about for 6 months. The house where my wife was probably curled up on the couch in her pajamas, maybe watching one of those reality TV shows she's addicted to, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was about to walk through the door and sweep her off her feet. But something was wrong with the picture. The upstairs lights were on, which was weird because Marissa always complained about the electric bill and had this whole routine about turning off every light in the house before going to bed. She used to joke that I married a woman who was part accountant, part environmentalist, and part drill sergeant when it came to household expenses. 2 cents saved is 2 cents earned, she'd say. Usually, while following me around the house, switching off lights I'd forgotten about. So, why were the upstairs lights blazing like she was hosting a rave up there? I paid the cab driver, grabbed my duffel bag, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring up at those bright windows. My chest was tight with something that wasn't quite excitement anymore, but wasn't quite dread either. It was that in-between feeling you get when you're about to open a door and you have no idea what's waiting on the other side. The smart thing would have been to call her, give her a heads up that I was home early, but where's the fun in that? I wanted to surprise her. Wanted to see that look of pure joy spread across her face when she realized her husband had managed to come home sooner than expected. I wanted to be the hero of my own love story for once instead of just another guy in combat boots trudging through someone else's war. So, I walked up that familiar driveway, past the flower beds Marissa had planted last spring, past the American flag I'd hung up before deployment, past all the little details that made this place home. My boots were quiet on the porch steps. Old habit from months of trying not to wake up half the barracks every time I moved. The spare key was still hidden under the fake rock by the door right where we'd left it. My hand was shaking just a little as I slid that key into the lock. 6 months of anticipation, 6 months of missing her, 6 months of counting down the days until this exact moment. I turned the key, pushed open the door, and stepped into what I thought would be the beginning of the best night of my life. Instead, I stepped into the beginning of the worst one. You ever have one of those moments where your brain just refuses to process what's happening? Like when you're watching a car accident in slow motion and part of you is thinking, this can't be real, while the other part is already calculating the damage. Yeah, well, welcome to my personal train wreck. Starring yours truly as the guy who should have just stayed in that damn cab. I stood in my own doorway like some kind of statue. Duffel bag still slung over my shoulder. Keys dangling from my hand like I'd forgotten how to use basic motor functions. The downstairs was dark. Not just dark, but that kind of staged darkness you see in those home invasion movies where everything's too quiet and too perfect. Like someone had arranged it specifically to mess with your head. Our living room looked exactly the same as when I'd left 6 months ago. Same couch where we used to binge watch Netflix until 3 o'clock in the morning, arguing about whether to start another episode or actually get some sleep. Same coffee table with that ring stain from the time Marissa forgot to use a coaster and spent 20 minutes apologizing like she'd committed a federal crime. Same family photos lined up on the mantle. All smiles and look how happy we are that now felt like evidence from a crime scene. But here's the thing about coming home from deployment. Your hearing gets weird. 6 months of listening for threats, for anything that doesn't belong, and suddenly you can hear a pin drop 3 rooms away. So when I heard the sounds coming from upstairs, every alarm bell in my head started going off like a fire drill in hell. Breathless laughter, the kind that makes your stomach drop because you know exactly what it means, even when your brain is still trying to come up with innocent explanations. Maybe she's watching a comedy show. Maybe she's on the phone with her sister. Maybe she's doing one of those online workout videos that make her giggle because the instructor has a funny accent. But then came the murmur. Low, deep, definitely male, and definitely not coming from a TV or a phone call. That's when my training kicked in. Not the how to be a good husband training, but the how to assess a threat without getting yourself killed training. Silent footsteps, controlled breathing, every muscle ready to react to whatever nightmare was waiting upstairs. I didn't call her name. What was I supposed to say? Honey, I'm home early. Hope you're not doing anything you shouldn't be doing. I didn't knock on the door frame like some polite visitor in my own damn house. And I sure as hell didn't announce my presence like this was some kind of social call. No, I channeled every bit of stealth training the army had beaten into me and made my way to those stairs like my life depended on it. Each step felt like it took an hour. You know how in horror movies the music gets all dramatic and the camera does that slow motion thing while the victim walks toward their doom? It was exactly like that, except there was no dramatic music, just the sound of my own heartbeat trying to punch its way out of my chest and the increasingly obvious sounds of my wife doing things that wives aren't supposed to do when their husbands are deployed overseas fighting for freedom and democracy and all that patriotic crap. The stairs in our house creak. I'd forgotten about that during my months away. But now, every little groan of the woods sounded like a gunshot in the silence, step by step, like I was climbing toward my own execution, which I guess in a way I was. The execution of every belief I'd had about my marriage, my life, my ability to judge character, and my general faith in the idea that good things happen to people who try to do the right thing. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, the sounds were unmistakable. I'm not going to spell it out for you because I'm not a masochist and this isn't some kind of twisted romance novel. But let's just say that my wife was definitely not alone, definitely not watching TV, and definitely not thinking about her husband, who was supposed to be thousands of miles away, missing her like an idiot. The bedroom door, our bedroom door, was cracked open just enough to give me a front row seat to the destruction of everything I thought I knew about my life. And because the universe apparently has a sick sense of humor, there was just enough light from the bedside lamp to see everything in perfect crystal clear high definition detail. Marissa, my wife, the woman who wore my dog tags around her neck in our wedding photos, and promised to love me in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, whether you're home or deployed, until death do us part. She was tangled up with some guy in what was supposed to be our bed, our sanctuary, our place. And she was kissing him like her life depended on it, like he was water. And she'd been dying of thirst. Like he was the answer to every prayer she'd ever whispered. But here's the kicker. I knew the guy, Charles Cadden, her boss from that marketing firm downtown. The same Charles Cadden she'd mentioned in her letters. Always in passing, always with some innocent little story about work drama or office politics. Charles thinks we should restructure the campaign. Charles brought donuts for everyone today. Charles is such a great mentor. Yeah, well, Charles was mentoring her in a lot more than marketing strategies, apparently. I'd met him at the company Christmas party before my deployment. Shook his hand, listened to him thank me for my service, watched him smile at Marissa with what I thought was just professional friendliness. Guy seemed decent enough. Married himself. Couple of kids. One of those suburban dad types who probably coached Little League on weekends and drove a sensible sedan. The kind of man you'd never suspect of screwing around with someone else's wife while that someone else was overseas getting shot at by people who wanted to kill Americans. They were so caught up in their little love scene that they hadn't heard me come home, hadn't heard me climb the stairs, hadn't noticed that the husband they were betraying was standing 10 feet away watching his entire world collapse in real time. And you know what the worst part was? They looked happy, not guilty, not sneaky, not like two people who knew they were doing something horrible. They looked like two people who belonged together, who fit, who made sense. My wedding photo was sitting right there on the nightstand. The same photo that used to make me smile every time I looked at it. Marissa in her white dress, me in my dress uniform. Both of us grinning like we just won the lottery. Except now it looked like the picture had turned away in shame. Tilted at an angle like it couldn't bear to witness what was happening in the bed it was supposed to be watching over. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, watching my marriage die in front of my eyes. Part of me wanted to kick down the door, start screaming, maybe throw Charles out the window, and give Marissa a piece of my mind that she'd never forget. Part of me wanted to break down, crying right there in the hallway, just collapse, and let the grief wash over me like a tidal wave. But you know what I did instead? I turned around, walked back down those creaking stairs, stepped out of that house like I was stepping out of my old life entirely. And I closed the door behind me quietly, carefully, like I was trying not to wake anyone up because sometimes the most devastating thing you can do isn't making noise. Sometimes it's making no noise at all. You know what's funny about life-changing moments? They don't come with a soundtrack or dramatic lighting or any of that Hollywood, they just happen usually when you're least prepared for them. And suddenly, you're standing on the other side of everything you thought you knew about yourself. One minute you're a happily married soldier coming home to surprise his loving wife, and the next minute you're a guy who just watched his entire world get flushed down the toilet by the two people he trusted most. The cab was still sitting there when I walked back outside. Same driver, same meter running, same everything, except now I was a completely different person than the hopeful idiot who'd gotten out of that car 5 minutes earlier. Funny how fast things can change when you're not paying attention. I slid into the back seat like I was moving through water. Everything feeling slow and surreal and not quite connected to reality. My duffel bag landed beside me with the same thud it had made earlier. But now it felt heavier somehow, like it was weighted down with all the expectations and dreams that had just gotten crushed upstairs in what used to be my bedroom. The driver turned around and looked at me with those kind eyes that cab drivers get when they've seen enough of life to recognize when someone's having the worst day of their existence. "Everything okay, man?" he asked. And I could tell he genuinely cared about the answer. Probably had kids of his own. Probably knew what it felt like to worry about someone you loved. Hell, maybe he'd been deployed himself at some point and understood the particular brand of homesickness that comes with military service. For a second, I almost told him, almost spilled the whole pathetic story right there in the back of his cab. How I'd been counting down the days. How I'd planned this perfect surprise. How I'd walked in on my wife screwing her boss in the bed I'd bought with my deployment pay. Almost broke down like some kind of emotional train wreck and let this stranger comfort me while I processed the fact that my marriage was dead than disco. But you know what deployment teaches you? It teaches you that sometimes the only thing standing between you and complete chaos is your ability to keep your mouth shut and figure out your next move. When mortars are raining down and your buddy's been hit and everything's going to hell around you, you don't have the luxury of falling apart. You assess the situation, you make a plan, and you execute that plan with whatever resources you have available. So instead of having a breakdown in the back of a cab, I looked at this decent guy who was just trying to do his job and said the only thing that made sense downtown. My voice sounded weird, too calm, too controlled, like it was coming from someone else entirely. The kind of calm that only happens when something inside you is snapped back into place. When all the emotional gets pushed aside and you start thinking like a soldier again instead of like a heartbroken husband. The driver gave me another look, probably trying to figure out if I was about to do something crazy or dangerous. But apparently, I passed whatever mental health check he was running because he just nodded and put the car in drive. You got it, buddy. As we pulled away from my house, former house, I guess, I found myself staring out the window at all those perfect suburban homes with their perfect suburban families doing their perfect suburban things. Porch lights glowing like beacons of domestic bliss. TVs flickering through living room windows, probably showing sitcoms or cooking shows or whatever normal people watch when their lives aren't imploding in real time. Mrs. Henderson was watering her ridiculous garden gnomes again because apparently that's what you do at 9 o'clock at night when you have nothing better to worry about than keeping your lawn decorations properly hydrated. The Johnsons had their entire family squeezed onto their front porch swing, looking like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Even the teenagers hanging out under the street light looked like they belonged in some heartwarming commercial about growing up in small-town America. And there I was, driving away from all of it like some kind of ghost, like I'd never belonged in that picture-perfect neighborhood in the first place. Which, let's be honest, maybe I never had. Maybe I'd been kidding myself this whole time, thinking I could come back from war zones and hostile environments and just slip back into civilian life, like putting on a comfortable pair of shoes. The thing about deployment is that it changes you in ways you don't expect. Not just the obvious stuff, the hypervigilance, the difficulty sleeping, the way loud noises make you want to hit the deck. It's the subtler changes that really get you. The way you start to see through people's because you've spent months depending on your ability to read situations accurately. The way you learn to trust your instincts because hesitation can get you killed. The way you realize that most of the things people worry about back home are completely meaningless when you've seen what real problems actually look like. Maybe that's why I wasn't screaming or crying or punching the back of the cab driver's seat. Maybe 6 months of staying alive in a war zone had taught me that emotional reactions are luxuries you can't afford when you need to think clearly. Maybe I'd learned something about myself that I never would have discovered if I'd stayed home and played house with a woman who was apparently playing house with someone else. The city lights started getting brighter as we headed downtown. All those neon signs and office buildings and late-night diners that stay open for people who have nowhere else to go. I'd always thought of downtown as the place you visited when you wanted excitement. When suburban life got too boring and you needed a taste of something different. Now it felt like exactly where I belonged. Anonymous, temporary, full of people who were between one thing and the next. Anywhere specific downtown? The driver asked, glancing at me in the rear view mirror. I almost laughed at that. Anywhere specific? Like I had a plan, like I'd thought this through, like I was some kind of master strategist who'd anticipated coming home early to find his wife in bed with her boss. The truth was I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house. Couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. Couldn't go back to being the naive husband who thought his marriage was solid just because he'd been getting sweet letters and care packages. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It's actually a pretty solid foundation to build on. When everything you thought you knew turns out to be a lie. When every assumption you'd made about your life gets proven wrong in the span of 5 minutes. You've got two choices. You can fall apart or you can start over. And I'd spent too many months in hostile territory to fall apart now. Just drive, I told him. I'll know it when I see it. The cab rolled through the downtown streets while I sat in the back seat, duffel bag beside me, wedding ring still on my finger, thinking about chaos and silence and the difference between reacting and responding. Deployment had taught me that when everything goes to hell, the person who stays calm usually wins. Time to find out if that lesson applied to civilian life, too. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, turns out I'd been meal prepping for months without even knowing it. While I was overseas playing soldier and writing sappy letters to my cheating wife, some paranoid little voice in the back of my head had been whispering what-if scenarios that I dismissed as trust issues and deployment anxiety. Turns out that paranoid little voice was the smartest part of me. Marcus Levin's law office sits in one of those downtown buildings that tries really hard to look impressive, but mostly just looks expensive. All marble and mahogany and the kind of furniture that screams. We charge by the hour and we're worth every penny. I've been there exactly once before when Marissa and I bought the house and needed someone to handle the paperwork. Back then, Marcus had seemed like overkill for a simple real estate transaction, but my dad always said, get the best lawyer you can afford, then figure out how to afford a better one. Now, I was sitting across from his massive desk at 8 o'clock in the morning, looking like I'd slept in my uniform, which I had, in a downtown hotel room that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. While Marcus stared at the folder I just dropped in front of him, like it contained nuclear launch codes. You already moved everything? He asked, flipping through page after page of bank statements, property deeds, trust documents, and financial transfers that I'd been working on for months. His eyebrows kept climbing higher up his forehead with each document, like he was watching a magic trick he couldn't figure out. I nodded once, keeping my expression as neutral as possible. Started the process 3 months ago. 3 months ago, he repeated slowly like he was trying to process the timeline. You've been planning this since I started getting suspicious, I said, which was technically true. I've been getting suspicious. All right. Not about Marissa specifically, but about the general idea that anything good in my life could last without proper backup plans. Military thinking, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and always have an exit strategy. The thing is, I hadn't actually suspected Marissa of cheating when I started moving assets around. I'd just been thinking about divorce statistics for military couples, about how many guys come back from deployment to find their entire lives dismantled, about how many wives decide that being married to a soldier is too hard and too lonely and too unpredictable. So, I'd started protecting myself just in case, moving money into accounts she didn't know about, shifting property titles into trusts she wasn't aware of. Basically, building a financial firewall around everything I'd worked for. I told myself it was just good planning, like buying life insurance or keeping emergency supplies. You don't do it because you expect disaster. You do it because disaster has a way of showing up when you're least prepared for it. And if disaster never comes, well, no harm done. You just have really good financial organization and some impressive paperwork. Turns out disaster had a name, and it was Charles Cadden. Marcus was still flipping through documents, occasionally making those little H sounds that lawyers make when they're either really impressed or really confused. This is comprehensive, he said. Finally, the house is entirely in your name through the trust. The bank accounts have been transferred. The investments are secured, even the cars, both registered to the trust, I confirmed. She's been driving around in vehicles she technically doesn't own for the last 2 months. He looked up at me with something that might have been respect or might have been mild fear. How did you know? I didn't, I said, which was the truth, but not the whole truth. I just believe in being prepared. What I didn't tell him was that deployment gives you a lot of time to think. And thinking gives you a lot of time to realize how vulnerable you are when your entire life is built on trust and assumptions. How easy it would be for someone to destroy everything you've worked for while you're on the other side of the world, unable to protect yourself or your interests. How many guys I'd served with had come home to find their wives had cleaned out bank accounts, sold houses, maxed out credit cards, and disappeared with new boyfriends who appreciated women who came with built-in financial benefits. So, I'd started making moves, quiet moves, legal moves, moves that looked like financial planning, but were actually more like building a fortress around everything that mattered to me. Opening new accounts in my name only, creating trusts that protected assets from marital division, rerouting direct deposits and automatic payments. Basically, I'd spent 3 months turning myself into a financial ghost, someone who existed on paper but couldn't be touched by the kind of betrayal I was apparently destined for. The beauty of it, I explained to Marcus, who was still staring at my paperwork like it was written in hieroglyphics, is that everything was done legally with proper documentation while I was overseas serving my country. Hard to argue that a deployed soldier was acting in bad faith when he was protecting assets he'd earned through military service. Marcus started laughing. Not the kind of laugh you hear at comedy clubs, but the kind of laugh lawyers get when they realize they're looking at a case that's already won before it started. She's going to contest this, he said. She's going to claim fraud, manipulation, that you hid assets. With what money? I asked. Her personal accounts have exactly enough to cover her cell phone bill and maybe a trip to Starbucks. Her credit cards are maxed out from shopping sprees. She thought I didn't know about. And her boss is about to have bigger problems than helping his side piece hire legal representation. That's when I pulled out the second folder, the one I'd been saving for dessert. Photos of Charles's car in our driveway at suspicious hours. Screenshots of text messages between them that I'd recovered from our shared cloud storage because apparently neither of them had figured out how technology actually works. Hotel receipts from business trips that coincidentally happened during my rare phone calls home. Email exchanges that started professional and ended up reading like bad romance novel excerpts. "You're going to destroy them," Marcus said. And for the first time since I'd known him, he actually sounded impressed instead of just professionally polite. "No." I corrected him, leaning back in the overpriced leather chair and feeling something like peace settle over me for the first time in hours. "I'm going to let them destroy themselves. I'm just going to make sure the process is properly documented, because here's what I learned overseas. The best battles are the ones where your enemy defeats themselves while you watch from a safe distance. You don't have to fire a shot. Don't have to get your hands dirty. Don't have to compromise your principles or your position. You just have to be patient, prepared, and smart enough to stay out of the way when everything collapses." "Divorce papers filed today," I told Marcus. "And I want the locks changed by tonight." "Consider it done," he said, already reaching for his phone to start making calls. "Anything else?" I stood up, grabbed my duffel bag, and headed for the door. "Yeah," I said over my shoulder. "Make it hurt." You ever watch one of those home improvement shows where they renovate someone's entire house in like 48 hours? Well, turns out dismantling someone's entire life takes about the same amount of time. Except it's way more satisfying and nobody has to pretend to be excited about the big reveal. By the time the sun started setting, I had more contractors at my house than a reality TV makeover. The locksmith, this grizzled old guy named Eddie, who looked like he'd been changing locks since the Civil War, was working on the front door while I supervised from the driveway like some kind of domestic operations commander. Behind him, a tech guy from the security company was reprogramming the garage door opener, and another specialist was updating the alarm system codes. "You sure about all this, son?" Eddie asked, drilling out the old deadbolt with the efficiency of someone who'd probably helped a lot of people lock out a lot of other people over the years. "Seems like a lot of work for one afternoon, I'm sure," I told him, watching him install a new lock that came with keys Marissa had never seen and would never see. "How long have you been doing this job, Eddie?" 37 years come October, he said, not looking up from his work. "Seen a lot of folks change their locks for a lot of reasons. Divorce, breakups, roommate drama, family disputes. Hell, I once changed locks for a lady who wanted to keep her mother-in-law out of her kitchen. Ever changed locks for a deployed soldier who came home early to find his wife entertaining company?" Eddie stopped drilling and looked at me with the kind of expression you see on the faces of people who've heard every story there is to hear. "Can't say that I have," he said quietly. "But I'm guessing this company wasn't the invited kind." "You could say that." He nodded and went back to work, not asking any more questions, because guys like Eddie understand that sometimes the less you know about your customer's business, the better you sleep at night. But I could tell he was on my side from the way he was being extra thorough with the installation, making sure every screw was tight and every mechanism was smooth as silk. While Eddie handled the physical security, I was busy handling the financial warfare from my phone. Bank after bank, account after account, credit card after credit card. "Yes, I'd like to freeze this account immediately." "No, I don't need to discuss it with the joint account holder." "That's correct. I'm removing her authorization as of right now." "Military service member." "Yes." "Fraud protection." "Exactly. It's amazing how cooperative financial institutions get when you use the magic words military service member and potential fraud. Suddenly, everyone's bending over backward to help you protect your assets. Probably because they've seen this movie before and they know how it ends. Deployed soldier gets screwed over by cheating spouse. Bank gets sued for not protecting service members' interests. Bank pays out massive settlement and gets terrible publicity. Much easier to just freeze everything and let the lawyers sort it out later. The joint checking account frozen. The savings account that was supposed to be for our future house down payment frozen. The credit card she'd been using for those girls' nights out that apparently included Charles Canneld. Even that store credit card she'd gotten for furniture shopping, the one she thought I didn't know about, gone. But the real masterpiece was the SUV. That beautiful, overpriced, payments higher than most people's rent SUV that Marissa had insisted we needed because it's an investment in our future, and we'll need the space when we start having kids. The same SUV she'd been driving to meet Charles for their little romantic renvous. Probably thinking she was so clever, so untouchable, so secure in her perfect little double life. I called the dealership while Eddie was installing the new deadbolt. "Hey, this is about the 2024 Escalade account number." I rattled off the details. "Yeah, I need to report it as let's call it unauthorized use. The primary account holder is requesting immediate repossession." "Sir, are you sure? That's going to leave the secondary driver without transportation." "That's exactly the point," I said, watching the security tech finish up with the garage door. "How soon can you pick it up?" "We can have a truck there within 2 hours." "Perfect. And just so we're clear, the secondary driver is no longer authorized to make any decisions about this vehicle. Any attempts to contact her about payments or account status should be directed to my attorney. I gave them Marcus' information and hung up, feeling like a chess player who just put his opponent in check without them even realizing the game had started. By the time the contractors finished up, my house looked exactly the same from the outside, but was completely different on the inside. New locks, new codes, new everything. The birthday I'd used for the alarm system, Marissa's birthday, was gone, replaced with the date I'd enlisted. The garage door opener she'd programmed to her car, reprogrammed to a frequency she'd never guess. Even the smart lock on the back door had been reset to recognize only my fingerprint. All set, Eddie said, handing me a set of keys that felt heavier than they should have. Nobody's getting in here without your permission. What do I owe you on the house? He said, packing up his tools with military-like efficiency. Thank you for your service, son. And for what it's worth, she's an idiot. After everyone left, I stood in my newly secured house, listening to the silence that felt different now. Not empty, but clean. Like I just completed the most important mission of my military career. Except this time, the enemy had been my own naive assumptions about love and loyalty and the idea that some things are sacred enough to survive anything. My phone started buzzing around 10 p.m. First a few calls, then more, then a steady stream of notifications that I ignored with the dedication of a professional. Marissa was probably just getting home from her romantic evening with Charles. Probably just discovering that her key didn't work anymore and her garage door remote had mysteriously stopped functioning. I made myself a sandwich and sat down to wait for the real show to begin. There's something deeply satisfying about watching your carefully laid plans come together like a perfectly executed military operation, especially when the targets have no idea they're walking straight into the trap you've spent months setting. It's like watching a nature documentary where the gazelle wanders right up to the lion. Except in this case, the gazelle was my cheating wife and her scumbag boss. And the lion was the sweet, sweet justice they were about to get served with a side of public humiliation. Marcus and I parked across the street from what used to be my house around 2 in the afternoon, sitting in his black BMW, like a couple of detectives on a stakeout. He'd brought coffee and donuts from that fancy place downtown, the kind that charges $8 for what's basically sugar and caffeine, but tastes like it was made by angels. I had to admit, for a lawyer who usually dealt with boring corporate stuff, Marcus was really getting into the whole revenge operation thing. You sure you want to watch this? He asked, adjusting his rear view mirror to get a better view of the front porch. Sometimes it's better to just let karma do its thing from a distance. Are you kidding me? I said, taking a sip of overpriced coffee that was actually worth every penny. I've been deployed for 6 months. This is the best entertainment I've had since that time our sergeant got stuck in a portiati during a sandstorm. We didn't have to wait long. At exactly 2:47 p.m., I know because I was timing everything like this was a tactical exercise, a familiar silver sedan pulled into my driveway. Marissa's temporary ride, borrowed from her sister because apparently her precious SUV had mysteriously vanished sometime during the night. She stepped out wearing that little black dress I bought her for our anniversary. The one she said made her feel sophisticated and powerful. Guess she was feeling sophisticated and powerful. All right, just not with her husband. And there was Charles getting out of the passenger side like he owned the place, straightening his tie, and checking his watch like this was just another business meeting instead of an afternoon booty call at his employee's house. The guy had the nerve to look relaxed, confident even, like he'd been doing this for so long that he'd forgotten it was technically adultery and morally reprehensible behavior. They walked up my front walkway holding hands. Holding hands like they were some kind of legitimate couple instead of two people who'd been lying and sneaking around behind my back for God knows how long. Marissa was laughing at something Charles had said, throwing her head back in that way she used to do when I told her jokes that weren't even that funny. The same laugh that used to make me feel like the funniest guy in the world was now making my stomach turn because she was wasting it on someone who didn't deserve it. Here we go. Marcus said, leaning forward in his seat like he was watching the season finale of his favorite TV show. Marissa reached into her purse and pulled out her house key. The same key she'd been using for 3 years. The same key that used to symbolize home and trust and the life we'd built together. She slid it into the lock with the confidence of someone who belonged there, someone who had every right to walk into that house and do whatever the hell she wanted. Nothing happened. She tried again, jiggling the key like maybe she'd just inserted it wrong the first time. Still nothing. I watched her face change from confusion to concern to the first flickerings of panic as she realized that something was very, very wrong. That's weird, she said loud enough for us to hear from across the street. The key's not working. Charles stepped up like the gentleman he pretended to be, probably figuring that his superior masculine lockpicking skills would save the day. He took the key from Marissa and tried it himself, putting more force behind it, turning it harder, like the lock was just being stubborn and needed a firm hand to cooperate. Also, nothing. "Did you get the lock changed?" Charles asked, which was honestly a pretty stupid question considering Marissa had been living there right up until the night before and would obviously know if the locks had been changed. "No," Marissa said, and I could hear the confusion in her voice starting to turn into something more like fear. "I don't understand. This is my house." "Wrong, sweetheart. Used to be your house. Now it's the house you used to live in before you decided to turn it into a love nest for you and your boss." They spent the next 10 minutes trying everything they could think of. Different keys from Marissa's keychain because maybe she'd grabbed the wrong one by mistake. The spare key hidden under the fake rock. Except, whoops, that lock had been changed, too. Even the back door, which they discovered was also newly secured when Charles tried to sneak around the side of the house like some kind of suburban burglar. That's when the pounding started. First just knocking, then actual pounding, then full-on beating the door like they were trying to break it down with their bare hands. "Open the door," Marissa screamed, her voice cracking with the kind of desperation you usually only hear in horror movies. "I live here. This is my house." My phone started buzzing once, twice, then constantly, like someone was holding down the call button and refusing to let go. Marissa's name kept flashing on the screen along with increasingly frantic text messages that I could see previews of without opening. "Where are you? Call me now. Something's wrong with the house." I looked at Marcus, who was watching the whole scene with the fascination of someone witnessing a car crash in slow motion. "You going to answer that?" he asked. "Nope," I said, taking another sip of my excellent coffee and settling back to enjoy the show. "I'm deployed, remember? No cell service where I am." By the time we finally drove away an hour later, Marissa was sitting on the porch steps crying like her world had just ended, which to be fair, it pretty much had. Charles was standing awkwardly beside her, probably realizing that his fun little side piece had just become a massive liability that could destroy his career, his marriage, and his comfortable suburban life. The last thing I saw in the rear-view mirror was Charles walking back to the car alone, leaving Marissa sitting there on the porch of the house she could no longer enter, surrounded by the ruins of the life she'd thrown away for a few months of excitement. Checkmate indeed. You know what's beautiful about a well-executed plan? It's like watching dominoes fall. Once you tip the first one, everything else happens automatically with a kind of mathematical precision that would make a physics professor weep with joy. And let me tell you, watching my ex-wife's life collapse in real time was better than any fireworks show I'd ever seen, including that 4th of July display at Fort Bragg where they accidentally set the entire field on fire. I was sitting in the hotel cafe at 7 a.m. the next morning, nursing my third cup of coffee and watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and orange that reminded me why I'd missed American mornings so much during deployment. The coffee here was decent. Not great, but a hell of a lot better than the stuff we'd been choking down overseas that tasted like it had been filtered through sand and regret. My phone was buzzing across the table like an angry wasp, vibrating so hard it was making little ripples in my coffee cup. 23 missed calls when I woke up. 46 by the time I finished my shower, 67 by the time I made it downstairs for breakfast. The numbers kept climbing like some kind of twisted lottery where the prize was getting to hear my cheating ex-wife lose her mind in real time. I picked up the phone just long enough to check the messages, not to answer them, obviously. The voicemail started out confused and worried. "Honey, where are you? Something's wrong with the house. Call me back." Then they got panicked. "I can't get into the house. The locks are different. What's happening?" Then they turned angry. "This is ridiculous. Call me right now." And finally, they devolved into the kind of desperate pleading that would have broken my heart 6 months ago, but now just sounded like white noise by the time I finished my eggs Benedict. And yes, I was treating myself to the fancy breakfast because what's the point of destroying your ex-wife's life if you can't enjoy some overpriced Holland sauce while you do it? The missed call counter had hit triple digits. 112 calls from a woman who apparently thought that dialing the same number over and over again would somehow change the fundamental laws of physics and make me materialize in front of her. But here's the thing about military training. It teaches you patience. Real patience. Not the fake kind where you're secretly counting to 10 and trying not to lose your temper. The kind of patience where you can sit completely still for hours waiting for exactly the right moment to move because you understand that timing is everything and premature action can ruin even the best laid plans. So, while Marissa was apparently having a complete meltdown in the parking lot of whatever hotel she'd ended up at, because according to her increasingly unhinged text messages, Charles had suddenly become unavailable and needed space to think, I was calmly filing paperwork that would turn her temporary homelessness into a permanent lifestyle change. First stop, the courthouse. Divorce petition filled out in triplicate with the efficiency of someone who'd been practicing military paperwork for years. Grounds for divorce. Adultery with photographic evidence attached. Asset division clearly outlined based on the trust documents that protected everything I'd earned before, during, and after our marriage. Spousal support. Hell no. Considering she'd been stealing from our joint accounts to fund her affair. The clerk looked at my paperwork with the kind of admiration usually reserved for perfectly executed drill formations. "This is very thorough," she said, stamping each page with the satisfaction of someone who appreciated attention to detail. "Your attorney did excellent work." "Thank you," I said, not mentioning that I'd done most of the prep work myself during those long nights overseas when I couldn't sleep and needed something productive to do with my insomnia. Next stop, restraining order. Because apparently Marissa had graduated from desperate phone calls to showing up at the hotel where I was staying, demanding answers and making enough noise to disturb the other guests. The hotel security footage of her screaming in the lobby at 6 a.m. was probably going to end up on one of those Karen freakout compilation videos, but it also made excellent evidence for a harassment claim. Then came my personal favorite, the fraud report. See, while I was overseas eating MREs and dodging hostile fire, Marissa had been using my military benefits to fund her little romance, dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend getaways to wine country, even jewelry that she'd claimed was a gift from her sister, but turned out to be charged to a credit card linked to my veterans account. Misuse of military benefits isn't just morally reprehensible. It's actually illegal with penalties that include fines, jail time, and a permanent record that follows you around like a bad smell. But wait, there's more. Because Charles wasn't getting out of this disaster unscathed while Marissa was busy having her public breakdown and probably Googling how to break into your own house, I was writing a very detailed, very professional letter to the corporate board of Charles's company. A letter that included time-stamped photos of his car in my driveway during business hours, screenshots of emails between him and Marissa discussing their lunch meetings that apparently lasted 3 hours and involved a lot more than discussing quarterly projections, and a comprehensive timeline of their workplace relationship that painted a very clear picture of sexual harassment, abuse of power, and misuse of company resources. The best part, Charles worked for one of those companies that takes workplace conduct very seriously. The kind of place that has mandatory seminars about appropriate professional relationships and zero-tolerance policies for managers who sleep with their employees. The kind of place where getting caught in an affair with a subordinate isn't just embarrassing, it's career suicide. By noon, I'd filed everything that needed filing, reported everything that needed reporting, and set in motion a chain of events that would systematically dismantle every aspect of the comfortable life that Marissa and Charles thought they could build on the foundation of my trust and naivety. The avalanche had officially begun, and I didn't have to push a single stone. I just had to sit back, enjoy my overpriced coffee, and watch gravity do what gravity does best. 467 missed calls by the end of the week, and I didn't answer a single one of them. Because sometimes the most devastating response isn't a response at all. You know what's worse than having a cheating wife? Having in-laws who think you're not good enough for their precious daughter, even when she's the one screwing around behind your back. The Whites, Philip, and Margaret, have been treating me like a discount son-in-law since day one. The kind of people who smile to your face at family dinners but spend the rest of the time whispering about how their daughter could have done better and settled too young. Well, it was time for the Whites to learn that sometimes the guy you look down on is the one who's been keeping your entire family afloat. Their house sits in one of those neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it was trimmed with nail scissors and every mailbox costs more than most people's cars. Old money vibes. Or at least the kind of fake old money vibes that come from Philip's middle management job at some insurance company and Margaret's part-time work at a boutique that sells scarves for $300 each. The kind of people who think having a cleaning lady twice a week makes them aristocracy. I pulled into their circular driveway at 10 a.m. on a Saturday because nothing says serious business like showing up when people are supposed to be relaxing in their pajamas and pretending their lives are perfect. My rental car, a basic sedan that probably cost less than Margaret's weekly manicure, looked hilariously out of place next to Philip's BMW and Margaret's Mercedes, both of which I happen to know were financed up to their chrome bumpers. The folder I carried looked innocent enough, just a manila envelope that could have contained anything from insurance documents to family photos. But inside was enough information to detonate their comfortable little world like a tactical nuke made of paperwork and uncomfortable truths. Margaret answered the door in full makeup and an outfit that probably took her an hour to put together because apparently even at home on Saturday morning, she needed to look like she was about to pose for a magazine cover about successful suburban living. Her smile was the same fake sweet expression she'd been giving me for 3 years. The one that said, "I'm being polite because I have to, but I'd rather be anywhere else." "Oh," she said, like finding me at her door was about as pleasant as discovering a raccoon in her garbage. We weren't expecting you. Marissa said you weren't coming home until next week. Plans changed, I said, holding up the folder. Is Philip home? I need to talk to both of you about something important. She led me into their living room, which looked like it had been decorated by someone who'd watched too many home design shows and had more money than taste. Everything was white and beige and carefully arranged to look casual while actually being completely artificial. Philip was sitting in his leather recliner reading some financial magazine, probably pretending to understand stock market analysis while actually just looking at the pictures. What's this about? Philip asked, not bothering to get up or even lower his magazine completely. The same dismissive attitude he'd been giving me since the day I married his daughter, like I was some kind of hired help who'd forgotten his place. I sat down on their ridiculously expensive couch without being invited and opened the folder on their glass coffee table that probably cost more than my first car. It's about your daughter, I said, laying out the first document. And about the fact that you've both been living a lie for the last year. The first document was a bank statement showing payments from my account to their mortgage company. Not a loan, not a gift, not a temporary help-out situation. Regular monthly payments that had been going on for over a year, covering their house payment because apparently Philip's middle management salary wasn't quite covering their upper-class lifestyle. Margaret's fake smile disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. Philip's magazine slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a thud that echoed through their suddenly very quiet living room. You've been paying our mortgage, Margaret whispered, staring at the bank statement like it was written in a foreign language, for 14 months. I confirmed, laying out the next document. Every month, like clockwork, while you two have been telling everyone who'd listen that I'm not good enough for your daughter and that she married beneath her station. The next document was even better. A detailed breakdown of every loan they'd asked for over the past 3 years, the car repair that turned into a full engine replacement, the roof work that somehow doubled in cost halfway through, the credit card payments I'd helped with during Philip's temporary cash flow problems that had lasted 8 months, all of it totaling up to a number that made Philip's face go white and Margaret's hands start shaking. But the real kicker, I said, laying out the final set of documents like I was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game, is what your precious daughter has been doing while I've been overseas keeping your family financially stable. These were the photos I'd been saving for special occasions. Charles's car in our driveway. Marissa and Charles holding hands outside restaurants I couldn't afford. Hotel receipts that corresponded exactly with days when she told me she was visiting her sick friend or working late on important projects, text messages between them that started professional and ended up reading like the kind of romance novel that would make a porn star blush. The silence in that living room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Margaret was staring at a photo of her daughter kissing Charles in the parking lot of the Marriott downtown. Her perfect makeup starting to run as tears formed in her eyes. Philip was reading text messages between his daughter and her boss that included detailed plans for spending my deployment money on romantic getaways. She's been stealing from our accounts. I continued because apparently I was just getting warmed up, military benefits, savings, everything we'd built together. Using my deployment pay to fund her affair while writing me letters about how much she missed me and couldn't wait for me to come home. Margaret started crying. Not the pretty, delicate tears you see in movies, but the ugly body-shaking sobs of someone whose entire worldview just got demolished with photographic evidence. Philip just sat there staring at the documents like he was trying to wish them out of existence through sheer force of will. Why are you showing us this? Philip finally managed to ask. I stood up, gathered my papers, and headed for the door because I sat over my shoulder. You spent 3 years telling me I wasn't good enough for your family. Turns out your family wasn't good enough for me. And I walked out, leaving them sitting in their expensive living room with the ruins of their perfect daughter's reputation scattered across their overpriced coffee table like confetti from the world's worst celebration. There's something almost artistic about watching someone's entire social media presence implode in real time. It's like performance art, except instead of pretentious gallery openings and overpriced wine, you get front row seats to the complete destruction of someone's carefully curated online persona. And let me tell you, Marissa's digital downfall was more entertaining than anything Netflix had to offer. It started about 2 weeks after the porch incident when she apparently decided that her best strategy was to play the victim card harder than a professional poker player with a royal flush. She launched into this whole social media campaign about being abandoned and betrayed and left homeless by the man who promised to love and protect her. Real tearjerker stuff, complete with carefully staged photos of her looking sad and vulnerable in her new cramped apartment that she'd rented with what was left in her personal checking account. The apartment, by the way, was a real piece of work. I may have driven by once or twice, just to make sure she was settling into her new lifestyle appropriately. It was one of those complexes that advertises luxury living, but really means we painted everything beige and installed the cheapest possible fixtures while charging premium prices. The kind of place where the walls are so thin you can hear your neighbor's Netflix shows and the parking lot always smells like someone's cooking fish in a microwave. Marissa's Instagram posts from her new home were comedy gold. Pictures of her tiny kitchenette with captions like, "Starting fresh in my cozy new space." Translation: I went from a 4-bedroom house to a studio apartment, and I'm pretending this was my choice. Photos of her walking to work with hashtags like #independentwoman and #newbeginnings carefully cropped to hide the fact that she was taking the bus because her SUV had mysteriously vanished and she couldn't afford car payments on her retail salary. Oh yeah, the job situation. Turns out that when your boss gets suspended for sexual harassment and misuse of company resources and you're the employee he was harassing and misusing resources with, your career prospects take a bit of a hit. The marketing firm where she'd been working Charles in more ways than one suddenly found reasons to restructure her position right out of existence. Amazing how that works. So there she was, 28 years old with a college degree and 3 years of marketing experience, working at some chain clothing store in the mall, folding sweaters and asking teenagers if they'd like to sign up for the store credit card. The same woman who used to brag about her corner office with a view and her important client presentations was now dealing with Black Friday shoppers and trying to meet sales quotas set by managers who were probably younger than her favorite pair of shoes. But the real entertainment was watching her try to maintain her victim narrative while her entire support system crumbled around her. See, the thing about affairs is that they don't happen in a vacuum. Other people always know, or at least suspect, and they're usually just being polite by pretending they don't see what's obvious to everyone with functioning eyes. Her friends started unfollowing her social media accounts one by one, like rats abandoning a sinking ship. The same girlfriends who used to comment heart emojis on all her posts and invite her to wine nights and weekend trips suddenly became very busy with their own lives. Amazing how quickly people disappear when your drama becomes too messy to ignore and your social status drops below their comfort zone. Margaret stopped answering her calls after our little chat. Philip, who used to take Marissa's side in every family argument and treat me like the hired help at family gatherings, suddenly developed a very strong opinion about daughters who bite the hand that feeds them. Even her sister, the one who'd loaned her the car for that fateful afternoon, started making excuses about why she couldn't help with money or transportation or emotional support. The breaking point came when someone, and I'm definitely not saying it was me, but I'm also not saying it wasn't, left an anonymous comment on one of her more dramatic Facebook posts about being abandoned by the person who was supposed to protect her forever. The comment was simple, direct, and absolutely devastating. Didn't you cheat on your husband while he was serving overseas? 6 words, 26 characters, including spaces. One question that cut through all her carefully constructed victim narrative like a sword through tissue paper. The post disappeared within an hour, but screenshots live forever. And apparently someone had been paying attention to Marissa's story long enough to connect the dots between her sob story and the timeline of events that everyone in town was starting to piece together. Small communities love gossip almost as much as they love supporting military families. And a woman who cheats on her deployed husband doesn't get a lot of sympathy points, no matter how prettily she cries about it. Charles, meanwhile, was dealing with his own version of social media hell. His wife, remember her? The woman he'd been married to for 12 years, the mother of his 2 kids, the person he'd been betraying every time he showed up at my house to play house with my wife, had apparently received an anonymous package containing photos, text messages, and a detailed timeline of her husband's extracurricular activities. I may have heard through certain channels that she'd filed for divorce with extreme prejudice, taking the kids, and about half of everything Charles owned. Apparently, she'd also shared some of the more damning evidence with their mutual friends because Charles's social media presence went from successful marketing executive and family man to radio silence faster than you could say adultery clause. The corporate investigation at their company was apparently very thorough and very public. The kind of thing that gets whispered about in break rooms and discussed in hushed tones during lunch meetings. Charles went from corner office to suspension to pursuing other opportunities in about 3 weeks, which in corporate speak means we fired his ass so hard it left skid marks. By the end of the month, Marissa's online victim act had completely collapsed. No more sympathy comments, no more supportive messages, no more friends rallying around her cause. Just a woman in a studio apartment working retail, posting increasingly desperate updates about learning to be strong and finding herself that nobody was reading because nobody cared anymore. The internet had moved on to fresher drama, leaving Marissa to face the consequences of her choices in blessed anonymous silence, just the way I planned it. 1 year later, and let me tell you, hindsight really is 20/20. Especially when you're looking back on the best revenge story ever told while sipping coffee on the deck of your own lakeside cabin, watching the sunrise paint the water in colors that make you remember why life is actually pretty damn beautiful when you're not sharing it with lying, cheating, soul-sucking parasites. The cabin wasn't some grand mansion or anything. Just a modest place I'd found about 3 hours north of the city, far enough away from the suburban nightmare I'd escaped, but close enough to civilization that I could still get decent internet and food delivery when I didn't feel like cooking. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that actually worked, and a view that made me understand why people write poetry about nature and solitude and finding peace in simple things. I bought it with the settlement money from the divorce because apparently when your wife commits fraud using military benefits while you're deployed, the courts tend to take a very dim view of her claims to marital assets. Who knew? The whole process had been smoother than a jazz saxophone solo. Thanks to all that prep work I'd done, and the fact that Marissa's legal representation consisted of some overworked public defender who'd probably never handled a military divorce, and definitely hadn't expected to go up against someone who documented everything with the precision of a Pentagon briefing. The irony was delicious. The money Marissa had stolen from our accounts, the military benefits she'd misused, the credit she destroyed, all of it had been recovered through legal channels and court-ordered restitution. Every month, like clockwork, a payment showed up in my account with her name on it. Money that she earned folding clothes and asking customers if they wanted to open a store credit card for an additional 10% off their purchase. But here's the thing that would have surprised the hell out of the angry, heartbroken guy who discovered his wife's betrayal a year ago. I wasn't using that money for revenge fantasies or expensive toys or anything that would have given Marissa the satisfaction of knowing she was still affecting my life. Instead, every penny of her restitution payments went straight into a non-profit I'd started for struggling veterans. Guys coming back from deployment to find their lives as screwed up as mine had been, just without the benefit of paranoid financial planning. Second Chances for Service members wasn't going to win any awards for creative naming, but it was helping real people deal with real problems. Guys who came home to find their wives had emptied bank accounts, sold houses, maxed out credit cards. Women who'd been financially abused by partners who thought military deployment meant open season on joint assets. Soldiers dealing with PTSD, unemployment, homelessness, addiction, all the fun stuff that nobody talks about in those patriotic commercials about supporting our troops. The monthly board meetings were held via video conference from my deck. Because one of the advantages of running your own nonprofit is that you get to set the dress code, and jeans and a t-shirt while sitting next to a lake is definitely my preferred uniform for discussing budget allocations and program effectiveness. We're up to 43 families assisted this quarter, reported Sarah, our program coordinator, who was probably young enough to be my little sister, but had more organizational skills than most generals I'd served under. The Emergency Housing Fund has helped 12 families avoid eviction, and the Legal Aid Program has handled 18 cases of financial fraud. Outstanding, I said. Watching a family of ducks paddle across the lake like they own the place, which I guess they did. What's our current funding situation? Stable and growing, said Tom, our treasurer, who is some kind of accountant wizard that Marcus had recommended. The monthly restitution payments provide a solid foundation, and we've got 3 corporate sponsors signed up for next year. Plus, that veterans organization in Texas wants to partner with us on a pilot program. Every month, Marissa's court-ordered payments helped another family avoid the kind of financial devastation she tried to inflict on me. Every dollar she earned folding sweaters at the mall became hope for someone else. Support for people who'd served their country and deserved better than being screwed over by the people they trusted most. The phone that used to buzz with 467 missed calls from a desperate cheating ex-wife had been silent for months now. Not because I'd blocked her number. I'd actually kept the same phone, the same number, everything the same. But because she'd finally figured out that I wasn't going to answer, wasn't going to engage, wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing she could still get a reaction out of me. Silence, as it turns out, is the most powerful weapon in the human arsenal. Not the kind of silence that comes from being speechless or scared or overwhelmed, but the kind that comes from having absolutely nothing left to say to someone who's proven they're not worth the energy it takes to form words. I didn't hate Marissa anymore. Hate requires caring, and caring requires emotional investment. And I divested myself of any feelings about her with the same clinical efficiency I'd used to protect my assets. She was just a person who used to be in my life, like a high school classmate or a former co-worker, someone I could remember without feeling anything particular about the memories. I didn't forgive her either, because forgiveness implies that what she did was forgivable. And betraying your deployed spouse while stealing their money and lying to their face falls pretty firmly in the unforgivable category. But I also didn't need forgiveness, didn't need closure, didn't need any of those therapeutic concepts that people throw around when they're trying to process trauma and move forward. I just needed distance, physical distance, emotional distance, and the kind of silence that speaks louder than any words ever could. As I sat there on my deck, watching the sun come up over water that belonged to no one and everyone at the same time, I realized that revenge isn't always fire and fury and dramatic confrontations that leave everyone bloody and broken. Sometimes revenge is just living well, building something meaningful, and never looking back at the wreckage you left behind. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone who's hurt you is to prove that you're better off without them. And that silence, my choice, my freedom was louder than any scream Marissa could ever make.
And that concludes this story. That was a pretty wild one if you ask me. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Now, let's get right into the next story. It's titled,
My wife's mother gave me homemade cookies to give my daughter. I accidentally dropped the jar at work. A pharmacist colleague picked one up and examined it. His face turned pale. These aren't cookies. We need to call the police. He stopped and called 911. Take your daughter to the hospital right now. What we discovered at the hospital left me speechless. Grant Reeves had learned to read the warning signs in his wife's voice. The slight edge that crept in when her mother called, the careful neutrality that replaced warmth. This Tuesday evening was no different. Melinda stood in their kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gripping the counter with white knuckles. Yes, Mother. I understand. A pause? No, that's not what I said. Another pause. Longer. Fine, tomorrow works. Grant looked up from where he sat helping their 7-year-old daughter, Emma, with her math homework at the dining table. Emma's pencil had stilled, her dark eyes watching her mother with that unsettling perceptiveness children develop in households with tension threading through the walls. Melinda ended the call and turned, forcing brightness into her expression. Mom's coming by tomorrow after work. She made cookies for Emma. The snickerdoodles. Emma's face lit up and Grant felt his chest tighten. His daughter shouldn't have to be this excited about something as simple as cookies from her grandmother. But Gertrude Murphy had a way of making her affection feel earned rather than given, doing out warmth like rations. Something special, she said. Melinda's smile didn't reach her eyes. She's been baking all week. Grant had been married to Melinda for 9 years, together for 12. And in all that time, he'd never quite managed to crack the code of his mother-in-law. Gertrude Murphy was a formidable woman, 63 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of the kind of steel-spined presence that made people instinctively straighten their posture. She'd raised Melinda alone after her husband Jeffrey passed when Melinda was 16, building a small real estate empire in the process. She was respected, successful, and had made it clear from day one that Grant, a civil engineer from a middle-class family in Ohio, was not the man she'd envisioned for her only daughter. That's nice of her, Grant said carefully, returning to Emma's homework. You're almost done here, sweetheart. Just 2 more problems. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Grant found Melinda staring out their bedroom window at the Chicago skyline. They lived in a modest 3-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park, modest by Gertrude's standards. Anyway, the older woman had offered to buy them something more suitable in Gold Coast, an offer Grant had politely declined. He'd worked hard for what they had, and he wasn't about to let Gertrude Murphy buy her way into more control over their lives. She asked about Emma's school again, Melinda said quietly. Suggested we consider Brightwood Academy. Grant's jaw tightened. Brightwood was the prestigious private school where Gertrude sat on the board. Emma's happy at Lincoln Elementary. I know. Melinda turned to face him, and in the dim light, he could see the exhaustion in her features. His wife was beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, auburn hair, green eyes that had first caught his attention at a mutual friend's barbecue. But lately, she looked worn down. I told her that. And she said, we're limiting Emma's potential. That with her connections, Emma could have opportunities we're denying her. Melinda's voice cracked slightly. Sometimes I wonder if she's right. Grant crossed the room and pulled his wife into his arms. Emma doesn't need Gertrude's connections. She needs parents who love her and let her be a kid, not some mini-adult being groomed for your mother's version of success. Melinda nodded against his chest, but Grant could feel the doubt still coiled inside her. That was Gertrude's particular talent, planting seeds of uncertainty, making you question decisions you'd been confident about moments before. The next evening, Gertrude arrived at 6:30 sharp, as punctual as always. She swept into their home wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her silver hair in its signature French twist, carrying an expensive leather handbag, and a ceramic cookie jar shaped like a cheerful bear. Grandmother. Emma rushed to hug her, and Gertrude's entire demeanor softened in a way Grant had rarely witnessed. Whatever else was true about the woman, she seemed to genuinely love her granddaughter. Hello, darling girl. Gertrude bent to kiss Emma's forehead, then straightened and fixed Grant with her cool, assessing gaze. Grant, Gertrude, thanks for coming by. I wouldn't miss seeing Emma. She set the cookie jar on the kitchen counter with a decisive thunk. I spent 3 days perfecting these. A new recipe, Belgian butter cookies with a special vanilla bean I had imported. Grant watched as she lifted the lid. Inside were perfectly uniform cookies, each one golden brown and dusted with what looked like powdered sugar. They smelled incredible, rich with butter and vanilla. Can I have one now? Emma bounced on her toes. After dinner, Melinda interjected gently. Why don't you go wash your hands? Dinner's almost ready. As Emma scampered off, Gertrude turned to Melinda. I wanted to discuss something with you both. Jeffrey's sister Maxine called. She's putting together a trust fund for Emma. College future expenses, but there are some paperwork requirements. Grant's antenna went up immediately. What kind of requirements? Gertrude's lips pursed slightly, as if his question was mildly offensive. Nothing invasive, just documentation establishing Emma's legal guardianship arrangements in case anything were to happen to you both. We already have that covered in our will. Grant said, my brother Lee is Emma's designated guardian. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lee, the one who lives in that trailer park in Ohio. It's a mobile home community, and he's a good man with a stable job. Stable? He works at a factory. Gertrude's voice dripped with disdain. Emma deserves better than being raised by someone who peaked at assembly line work. That's enough. Grant's voice was quiet but firm. Lee is my brother and he's a good person. Better than a lot of people with bigger bank accounts. Melinda stepped between them. Her peacemaker role so practiced it looked like choreography. Mom, let's not do this. Dinner's ready. Can we just have a nice evening? Gertrude smoothed her jacket, her composure sliding back into place. Of course. I apologize. I only want what's best for Emma. Dinner was a tense affair. Conversation carefully steered toward neutral topics. Emma's upcoming field trip, a new restaurant Gertrude had tried. Grant's latest project designing a sustainable housing development. But underneath it all, Grant could feel the undercurrent of Gertrude's disapproval, her subtle undermining. She complimented Melinda's cooking with a mention of how she herself used fresh herbs from her rooftop garden. She praised Emma's report card while suggesting additional tutoring in mathematics. Each comment had a barb hidden in velvet. After Gertrude left, departing without the cookie jar, insisting Emma should enjoy them all. Grant helped Melinda clean up while Emma watched cartoons. I'm taking the cookies to work tomorrow. Grant said, share them with the team. We've been pulling long hours on the Riverside project. Melinda looked up from loading the dishwasher, surprised. Mom made them for Emma, and Emma can have some, but that's too many cookies for a 7-year-old. He glanced at the jar. Besides, it might smooth things over with your mother if I make a point of enjoying her baking. It was a peace offering in his own way, and Melinda recognized it. She smiled slightly. That's actually thoughtful. I have my moments. The next morning, Grant packed the cookie jar carefully in his messenger bag alongside his laptop and project files. His firm Morrison & Associates was a mid-sized civil engineering company with offices in a renovated warehouse in the West Loop. Grant specialized in sustainable urban development. And lately, he'd been consumed by the Riverside project, a mixed-use development that would transform an abandoned industrial site into affordable housing and community spaces. His team of 6 engineers and designers had been working overtime, and Grant had developed a reputation as a fair but demanding project lead. He built his career on competence and integrity, refusing to cut corners or compromise on safety standards, even when clients pushed back. It had cost him some contracts over the years, but he slept well at night. The morning was consumed by meetings, conference calls with contractors, budget reviews, permit discussions. It wasn't until nearly noon that Grant remembered the cookies. He was in the break room about to open the jar when his phone rang. Grant, we need you in Conference B, his boss, Clark Chung, said. The Riverside investors are here early. Grant cursed under his breath, set the cookie jar on the counter, and hurried out. The meeting ran long. Investors always had more questions than time allotted, and by the time Grant emerged, it was past 1. He grabbed the cookie jar and headed back to his office, intending to finally distribute the cookies and grab lunch. But as he rounded the corner near the elevators, he collided with someone. The cookie jar flew from his hands, hit the tile floor, and shattered. Damn it. Grant dropped to his knees, staring at the scattered cookies and broken ceramic. The cheerful bear's head had split clean off. I'm so sorry, man. Ismail Collins, one of the pharmaceutical researchers from the biotech firm that shared their building, crouched down beside him. I wasn't watching where I was going. No, it's my fault. I was distracted. Grant started gathering the larger pieces of ceramic. Careful of the sharp edges. Ismail picked up one of the cookies, examining it. These look amazing. Homemade. My mother-in-law made them. I was going to share them with the team. Grant sighed. Most of them look okay. At least the jar is the only casualty, but Ismail wasn't responding. Grant looked up and saw his friend's expression had changed. Ishmael was holding the cookie close to his face, turning it slowly, and his brown skin had taken on a grayish cast. Ismail. Grant, where did you say these came from? My mother-in-law. What? Ismail stood abruptly, still holding the cookie. Come with me right now. What? I need to clean this up. Leave it. Ismail's voice was sharp with urgency. This is important. Do you have more of these at home? Yeah, my daughter was supposed to. Why? What's wrong? Ismail was already walking rapidly toward the elevators. Grant hurrying after him. They rode down to the third floor where Ismail's pharmaceutical research lab occupied a corner suite. Ismail badged them through security, led Grant to his personal lab, and placed the cookie under a microscope. After a moment, Ismail pulled back, his hands shaking slightly. He moved to a chemical analysis station, broke off a small piece of the cookie, and began running tests Grant didn't fully understand. 5 minutes passed in tense silence. Then, Ismail's computer beeped. He stared at the screen, and Grant watched all the color drain from his friend's face. These aren't cookies, Ismail said quietly. I mean, they are, but he turned to Grant, and there was fear in his eyes. Grant, there's arsenic in these. A lot of it. Enough to make someone very sick. Possibly kill a child. The room tilted. Grant grabbed the edge of the lab table to steady himself. That's impossible. He heard himself say, Gertrude made these for Emma. She loves Emma. I'm calling 911. Ismail already had his phone out. And you need to call your wife right now. If your daughter ate any of these. Grant's hands were numb as he pulled out his phone. The call to Melinda went straight to voicemail. She'd be in her weekly department meeting at the marketing firm where she worked. He tried their home phone. No answer. Melinda's not picking up. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. Emma's at school. She's at school. She didn't have any this morning. Are you sure? Grant's mind raced back. This morning, Emma had been running late. He'd made her toast and packed her lunch while Melinda dried her hair. Neither of them had mentioned cookies. The jar had been sitting on the counter where he'd left it the night before. I'm sure she didn't have any. Ishmael was talking to the 911 operator, explaining the situation. Grant heard him say arsenic poisoning and child in danger and police need to be notified. They're sending officers to the building and to your home, Ismail said after hanging up. They want you to go to the hospital with your daughter immediately. They're also sending someone to her school to make sure she doesn't consume anything your mother-in-law might have given her. Grant's shock was crystallizing into something else. A cold, focused fury. He pulled out his phone again and called Lincoln Elementary. The secretary answered on the second ring. This is Grant Reeves, Emma Reeves' father. I need to speak to her teacher immediately. It's an emergency. Minutes later, he had confirmation. Emma hadn't eaten anything unusual. She'd had the lunch Grant packed and she'd mentioned to her teacher that her grandmother had brought cookies, but she hadn't brought any to school. But Grant, Emma's teacher, Joy Buchanan, said carefully. Emma did say something odd. She said her grandmother told her to make sure she ate at least 3 cookies every day and that it was their special secret. A special secret. Grant's hand clenched around his phone so hard he heard the case crack. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 detectives, a man and a woman, both wearing expressions of grim professionalism. Ishmael had bagged the cookie he'd tested along with several others from the scattered pile, documenting everything with photos. Mr. Reeves, I'm Detective Carol Fletcher, and this is Detective Orlando House, the woman said. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. We need to ask you some questions about your mother-in-law. Grant told them everything he could think of. Gertrude's name, address, her relationship with Emma, the tension in their family, last night's visit. He tried to be objective, but rage kept bleeding through his words. Has Mrs. Murphy ever threatened your daughter? Detective House asked. He was younger, maybe early 30s, with the kind of alertness that suggested he didn't miss much. No, never. She seemed to love Emma. She's controlling, manipulative, but I never thought. Grant couldn't finish the sentence. What about life insurance? Any financial motive? Emma has a small policy, but I'm the beneficiary, not Gertrude. There's no money motive that I know of. Detective Fletcher exchanged a look with her partner. Mr. Reeves, I need you to be honest with me. Is your marriage stable? The question hit Grant like a slap. What does that have to do with anything? Just answer the question, please. It's stable. We have the usual stress. Money, work, dealing with Gertrude's interference. But we're solid. Why? Because sometimes grandparents act to rescue a grandchild from a situation they perceive as harmful. If your mother-in-law disapproved of you strongly enough, the implications settled over Grant like ice water. Gertrude hadn't been trying to kill Emma. She'd been trying to make Emma sick enough to remove her from Grant and Melinda's custody. She wants Emma, he said slowly. She's been pushing for guardianship arrangements, criticizing our parenting, our choices. Detective Fletcher nodded grimly. We've seen cases like this before. Not common, but not unheard of. Usually involves grandparents who believe they can provide a better life. I need to get to my daughter now. Officers are already at her school. She's safe. But yes, take her to Chicago Memorial for a full toxicology screening. We're getting a warrant for your mother-in-law's residence and any communications between her and your wife. Melinda doesn't know anything about this, Grant said sharply. We'll determine that right now. Don't contact Mrs. Murphy. Don't warn her. We need to catch her with evidence, the recipe, the arsenic source, anything that proves intent. Grant drove to Lincoln Elementary in a daze, his mind churning. He kept seeing Emma's face light up when Gertrude had walked in with that cookie jar. Kept hearing his daughter say it was their special secret. Emma was waiting in the principal's office with Miss Buchanan and 2 uniformed officers. When she saw Grant, she ran to him and he scooped her up, holding her tight enough to make her squeak. Daddy, why are the police here? Did something bad happen? Grant pulled back and looked at his daughter, her dark hair and pigtails. Her small face worried but not scared. She trusted him to make things right. She always had. We're going to the hospital, sweetheart, just to make sure you're healthy. But I feel fine. I know, but we need to check something. Did you eat any of grandmother's cookies? Emma shook her head. I wanted it this morning, but you said after school, and I was going to have one when I got home. Thank God. Thank God for rushed mornings and his own forgetfulness. At Chicago Memorial, they were taken immediately to a private examination room. A doctor named Brenda Stevens, a calm woman in her 50s, explained they'd be running blood tests and a full toxicology panel. What are we looking for? Emma asked, her child's directness cutting through adult euphemisms. Dr. Stevens glanced at Grant, who nodded. His daughter deserved honesty. We're checking to make sure nothing bad was in the cookies your grandmother made. Emma's eyes widened. Like poison? Like something that could make you sick? Yes. To Grant's surprise, Emma didn't cry. She just processed this information with solemn seriousness and held out her arm for the blood draw. While they waited for results, Melinda arrived ashen-faced and shaking. She'd gotten Grant's messages and the police notifications simultaneously. How could she? Melinda kept repeating. How could she do this? But underneath the shock, Grant could see something else taking root in his wife's expression. Guilt. Because part of Melinda had always known her mother was capable of extreme actions. She just never imagined they'd be directed at Emma. The toxicology results came back an hour later. Emma's blood was clean. She'd never ingested the arsenic. But Dr. Stevens's expression was grave as she delivered the follow-up news. The police asked me to inform you. They found the same arsenic compound in a bottle of vanilla extract at your mother-in-law's home. The compound is typically used in industrial applications, specifically in wood preservatives. Mrs. Murphy worked in real estate development before retiring. She would have had access. Melinda made a small wounded sound. Grant put his arm around her shoulders. There's more. Dr. Stevens continued. Detectives found email communications between Mrs. Murphy and an attorney discussing emergency custody petitions. She'd been planning this for months. The final piece clicked into place. Gertrude hadn't snapped or acted impulsively. This had been calculated, methodical. She'd been trying to make Emma chronically ill. Sick enough to justify removing her from their home, but not sick enough to be immediately fatal. A slow poisoning that would be attributed to neglect or environmental factors until Gertrude could swoop in as the concerned grandmother seeking custody. Grant felt something dark and cold settle in his chest. The police would handle the legal aspects. Gertrude would be arrested, charged, prosecuted, but that wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. His daughter had been targeted by someone who was supposed to love her. His wife was destroyed by her mother's betrayal. And Grant was going to make absolutely certain that Gertrude Murphy paid for what she tried to do. Not just through the legal system, but in ways that would strip away everything she valued. Her reputation, her standing in the community, her carefully constructed image of the devoted grandmother and successful businesswoman. Grant had always played by the rules, taken the high road, been the better person. But Gertrude had broken something fundamental when she put arsenic in those cookies. And Grant was going to show her exactly what happened when you came after his family. The arrest happened fast. Within hours of the hospital visit, Gertrude Murphy was taken into custody at her penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. Grant wasn't there. The police had advised him to stay away, but Melinda's cousin, Tabitha Duke, called with updates. Her voice hushed and shocked. "They found everything," Tabitha said. "The arsenic compound, the recipe with dosage notes in the margins, emails to that lawyer about custody procedures. She'd been documenting Emma's school records, your finances, everything, building a case that you two were unfit parents." Grant sat in their darkened living room. Emma finally asleep in her bed after hours of reassurances that she was safe. Melinda was in their bedroom, alternating between crying and staring at nothing. The woman Grant had married seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger. "There's something else," Tabitha continued. "The police found a journal. Gertrude had been planning this since Emma was born. She wrote about how you weren't good enough. How Melinda made a mistake marrying you. How Emma needed to be saved from a mediocre life." Grant's grip tightened on his phone. She wrote this down in detail like she was proud of it, like she was the hero of her own story. Tabitha's voice cracked. "I knew Aunt Gertrude could be difficult, but she's sick. Grant, she needs help." After hanging up, Grant sat in the darkness for a long time. His engineer's mind, trained to solve problems systematically, was already working through angles and possibilities. The legal process would unfold. Arraignment, bail, hearing, trial. With the evidence the police had, conviction seemed certain. Gertrude would go to prison, but Grant knew the reality of the justice system. She was 63, a first-time offender from a wealthy family with no prior record. Her lawyers, and she'd hire the best, would argue diminished capacity, mental illness, grandmotherly concern gone tragically wrong. She might serve 5 years, maybe 10 if they were lucky. That wasn't justice. Not for what she tried to do. Grant pulled out his laptop and started researching. He'd never been the vengeful type, never understood people who dedicated themselves to payback, but he was discovering new depths in himself, a capacity for cold, calculated fury that felt both foreign and entirely natural. Over the next few days, while Melinda struggled to function and Emma asked questions no 7-year-old should have to ask, Grant dug into Gertrude's life with the same meticulous attention he applied to structural calculations. Gertrude Murphy had built her real estate empire through a combination of shrewd investing and ruthless business practices. She'd started with the inheritance from her late husband Jeffrey, a substantial sum from his family's manufacturing business, and parlayed it into ownership of 12 commercial properties across Chicago. She sat on boards, chaired charity committees, and had her name on a wing of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Her reputation was everything to her. Grant had seen it in the way she controlled conversations at social gatherings, the way she name-dropped connections, the way she'd react with cold fury to any perceived slight or challenge to her authority. Gertrude's arraignment was set for the following week. She'd been released on $1 million bail posted immediately by her attorney, a shark named Brendan Ramos, who specialized in defending wealthy clients. Grant attended the hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom while Ramos argued that his client was a pillar of the community, a devoted grandmother who'd suffered a mental break brought on by grief over her late husband and concern for her granddaughter's welfare. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Gail McGowan, pushed back hard, detailing the premeditation and the cache of evidence, but Grant could see some of the observers softening as Ramos painted Gertrude as a tragic figure. When Gertrude entered the courtroom, she looked nothing like the steel-spined woman who'd swept into his home with poisoned cookies. She appeared frail, elderly, wearing a simple dress instead of her power suits. Her silver hair hung loose around her shoulders. She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. It was a performance, and Grant recognized it for what it was, but it would work on some people. It always did. After the hearing, Grant was approached by a man in his late 50s wearing an expensive suit and an expression of controlled anger. He introduced himself as Ted Holmes, CEO of a commercial development firm. "I knew Gertrude professionally," Ted said. "We served on the architectural review board together. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what she did to your family and I hope they throw the book at her." Grant studied the man, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched. "You don't sound like someone who just knew her professionally." Ted glanced around, then lowered his voice. 15 years ago, Gertrude and I were in competition for a prime development site in River North. She won the bid through what I later discovered were falsified inspection reports and bribes to city officials. I had proof, but by the time I could act, she'd sold the property at triple the price and buried the evidence. Cost me millions and nearly destroyed my company. Why tell me this? Because I've been waiting a long time to see Gertrude Murphy get what she deserves. And because if you're looking for leverage, Ted handed Grant a business card. I have files. Documentation I could never use in court because the statute of limitations expired, But if you wanted to damage her reputation, show the world who she really is. Grant pocketed the card. I'll be in touch. That night, Grant sat down with the files Ted had emailed. They detailed a pattern of corruption, intimidation, and fraud spanning decades. Gertrude had built her empire on the suffering of others. Small business owners forced out, contractors cheated, regulations bypassed, and she'd gotten away with it all through careful legal maneuvering and strategic donations to the right political campaigns. The more Grant read, the clearer his path became. Gertrude valued three things above all else: wealth, reputation, and control. The criminal trial would threaten her freedom, but Grant was going to systematically dismantle everything else. He started with quiet phone calls. Ted Holmes connected him with others who'd been burned by Gertrude, a contractor named Allenberg, who'd been blacklisted after refusing to use substandard materials. A former business partner named Hannah Sheridan who'd been forced out of a lucrative deal through manufactured accusations. A nonprofit director named Peggy Rosales who'd watched promised donations evaporate when she wouldn't support one of Gertrude's pet projects. Each person had a story. Each one had been powerless against Gertrude's wealth and influence, but together they represented a pattern. Grant began assembling a comprehensive dossier, cross-referencing public records with the private testimonies. He worked late into the nights while Melinda slept fitfully, and Emma had nightmares about cookies that turned into monsters. 3 weeks after the arrest, Grant made his first move. He contacted Angelo Roman, an investigative journalist with the Chicago Tribune, known for his exposés on corruption and white-collar crime. They met at a coffee shop in Hyde Park, far from Grant's usual haunts. Angelo was in his 40s with tired eyes and the rumpled appearance of someone who'd spent too many nights chasing leads. "I've been following the Gertrude Murphy case," Angelo said after Grant explained why they were meeting. "Attempted poisoning of her own granddaughter. It's horrific. It's also just the latest crime in a 30-year pattern." Grant slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything on here is documented, verified with witnesses willing to go on record." Angelo examined the drive. "Why come to me? The prosecutor already has her dead to rights on the poisoning charge. Because prison isn't enough. Gertrude Murphy built her life on a facade of respectability. She poisoned my daughter, but she's poisoned this city for decades through corruption, fraud, and exploitation. I want everyone to know who she really is." Angelo's expression shifted from skeptical to interested. "You want to destroy her legacy? I want the truth exposed. What happens to her legacy is just a consequence." Over the following month, while the legal machinery ground toward trial, Angelo's investigation unfolded like a masterclass in journalism. He started with small articles, profiles of people Gertrude had wronged, analyses of suspicious property deals, examinations of her charitable foundation's finances. Each article cited sources, included documentation, and followed every ethical guideline. There was nothing Gertrude's lawyers could do to stop it because everything Angelo published was true. The effect was cumulative and devastating. Board positions that had seemed secure began to wobble as organizations distanced themselves from the mounting scandal. Northwestern Memorial quietly removed her name from the hospital wing, returning her donation and citing changed circumstances. The Architectural Review Board accepted her resignation. But Grant wasn't done. His second move targeted Gertrude's financial empire directly through his network of engineers and developers. Grant had learned that several of Gertrude's commercial properties had code violations that had been overlooked for years through her connections with city inspectors. Armed with Ted Holmes's documentation and his own professional knowledge, Grant filed formal complaints with the Department of Buildings, triggering mandatory inspections. The inspections revealed what Grant had suspected: serious structural issues, safety hazards, violations that would require expensive remediation. Properties that had been generating steady rental income suddenly faced closure orders until repairs were completed. Gertrude's income stream began to dry up. Her legal fees, meanwhile, were mounting. Brendan Ramos didn't come cheap, and the complexity of the case was only increasing as prosecutors added charges based on the arsenic purchase records and premeditation evidence. Grant watched it all unfold with grim satisfaction, but the most important phase of his plan was still ahead. He'd been studying Gertrude's trial strategy through contacts with the prosecutor's office. Ramos was planning to argue diminished capacity that Gertrude had suffered a psychotic break brought on by unprocessed grief over her husband's death and an irrational fear that Emma was in danger. The defense would paint her as a tragic figure, a grandmother who'd loved too much and lost her way. They'd bring in expert witnesses, psychiatrists who'd testify to her mental state. They'd emphasize her age, her previously clean record, her community contributions. It was a strategy that might work, especially with the right jury. Grant couldn't let that happen. He needed Gertrude to condemn herself, and he knew exactly how to make that happen. The key to Gertrude's personality, Grant had learned over 9 years of marriage, was her absolute conviction in her own righteousness. She never believed she was wrong, only that others were too limited to understand her vision. Even now facing criminal charges, she would see herself as the victim of misunderstanding. That certainty was her weakness, and Grant was going to exploit it. Through Melinda's cousin, Tabitha, who'd been horrified by her aunt's actions, but maintained nominal contact. Grant learned that Gertrude was writing a memoir while out on bail. She was documenting her version of events, her justifications, her perspective on how she'd only been trying to protect Emma from a mediocre life with unsuitable parents. Gertrude couldn't help herself. She had to be understood, had to explain, had to prove she'd been right all along. Grant arranged for Tabitha to accidentally mention to Gertrude that a major publisher was interested in true crime stories from the inside. The publisher was real enough. A small press that specialized in controversial narratives. What Gertrude didn't know was that the acquisition editor Grant had her dealing with was actually Lon Kirby, one of Ted Holmes's employees with a background in corporate intelligence. Lon encouraged Gertrude's writing, asked probing questions, got her to elaborate on her planning, her reasoning, her view of Grant and Melinda as negligent parents. Every conversation was recorded, every email was saved. Meanwhile, Grant worked a parallel track through Emma's therapist. Dr. Mara Houston had been seeing Emma twice a week to help her process the trauma of learning her grandmother had tried to poison her. With Grant and Melinda's permission, Dr. Houston documented Emma's healing process, including statements Emma made about Gertrude's behavior leading up to the poisoning attempt. Emma talked about how grandmother had always made her feel special, but also different from other kids. How grandmother said Emma was too good for public school, for their neighborhood, for the life her parents provided. How grandmother had told her the cookies were a special medicine that would make her strong and smart like grandmother herself. The prosecution added this evidence to their case. But more importantly, Dr. Houston, with the family's consent, prepared a victim impact statement that would be read at sentencing. It was Emma's voice captured in heartbreaking clarity, describing how she trusted her grandmother and felt betrayed. As the trial date approached, Grant implemented the final phase of his plan. He'd been monitoring Gertrude's remaining business interests through public records, and he'd noticed something interesting. Her flagship property, a historic building in the Loop that housed upscale retail and offices, was mortgaged to the hilt. She'd been using it as collateral for years, refinancing repeatedly to fund her lifestyle and legal fees. Grant had a friend from college, Tyrone Kerr, who worked in commercial real estate investment. Through Tyrone, Grant connected with several investors who were interested in distressed properties. He fed them information about the building's financial instability, the mounting code violations at Gertrude's other properties, her legal troubles. The investors began making inquiries, which spooked Gertrude's lenders. Banks didn't like uncertainty, especially when their collateral was connected to someone facing criminal charges and a publicity nightmare. 2 months before trial, the bank called Gertrude's loan. She had 90 days to pay the full balance or face foreclosure. She couldn't pay. Her other properties were tied up in remediation and couldn't be sold quickly. Her legal fees had drained her liquid assets. The charitable foundation she'd controlled had severed ties. Gertrude Murphy, who'd built an empire on power and control, was watching it crumble in real time. Grant knew about the foreclosure before it was public because Tyrone called him. "The building's going to auction next month. You interested?" "Not personally," Grant said. "But I know some people who might be." He connected Tyrone with Alan Burke, the contractor Gertrude had blacklisted, and Hannah Sheridan, the former business partner she'd forced out. Together, they formed a limited partnership and placed a bid. They won the auction at 70 cents on the dollar. Gertrude's crown jewel, the building she'd pointed to as proof of her business acumen, now belonged to people she'd wronged. The symbolism wasn't lost on the press. Angelo Roman covered it in his ongoing series, tying it to the larger story of Gertrude's fall from grace. The trial began on a gray Monday in October. The courtroom was packed. Media, curious onlookers, some of Gertrude's former society friends attending more from morbid fascination than support. Grant sat in the front row every single day, Emma and Melinda beside him. When the testimony wasn't too graphic, he watched as prosecutor Gail McGowan systematically built her case. The arsenic purchase, the recipe with dosage calculations, the emails about custody, the journal entries planning the poisoning, the expert testimony about the compound's effects. Gertrude's defense was exactly what Grant had anticipated. Brendan Ramos called psychiatrists who testified about late-onset mental illness, about grief-induced psychosis, about a grandmother's love twisted into something tragic. He emphasized her age, her previously unblemished record, her charitable work. He tried to paint Grant as a vindictive son-in-law who'd poisoned the relationship between grandmother and grandchild through jealousy and control. Grant endured it all with calm composure because he knew what was coming. When it was his turn to testify, Grant spoke clearly and factually. He described the family dynamics, Gertrude's controlling behavior, the cookie arrival, the discovery at his office. He remained measured even when Ramos tried to rattle him during cross-examination. "Isn't it true you resented my client's success?" Ramos demanded. "No," Grant said simply. "I resented her attempts to undermine my marriage and control my daughter's life. Success has nothing to do with it. You've orchestrated a campaign to destroy her reputation, haven't you? I've cooperated with journalists investigating her business practices. I filed legitimate complaints about code violations. I've exercised my legal rights. Just as she exercised what she believed were her rights when she put arsenic in cookies meant for my daughter." The jury leaned forward, engaged. Grant had their attention. Melinda's testimony was harder to watch. She spoke through tears about her mother's betrayal, about the guilt she felt for not seeing the warning signs, about the damage to her relationship with Emma. "My mother taught me that love meant control." Melinda said that if you really cared about someone, you made their decisions for them. "I spent my whole life trying to earn her approval, and I never realized that she didn't actually want me to succeed. She wanted me dependent." But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source, Gertrude herself. Ramos had advised against it, but Gertrude insisted. She needed to explain herself to make the jury understand. It was her fundamental nature, the same compulsion that had led her to write the memoir, to document her planning, to believe she could justify the unjustifiable. She took the stand in a conservative dress, her silver hair styled, her posture erect, and she proceeded to bury herself. "I only wanted what was best for Emma," she began, and it went downhill from there. She talked about Grant's mediocre career, Melinda's failure to maximize her potential, Emma's wasted opportunities. She described her calculations, how much arsenic would make Emma sick but not fatally ill, how she'd planned to document the symptoms, how she'd arranged for expert medical testimony about environmental toxins in their neighborhood. "I was going to save her," Gertrude said, and she actually sounded sincere. "Give her the life she deserved with opportunities, with culture, with excellence." Prosecutor McGowan barely had to cross-examine. She just let Gertrude talk, rope out, hang herself. "You're saying you deliberately poisoned your granddaughter?" "I was administering a controlled dosage to create symptoms that would justify intervention." "You purchased industrial arsenic and baked it into cookies." "I used a precisely calculated amount." "That could have killed her." "No, I was very careful. I'm not a monster." The courtroom was silent except for someone in the back row gasping. Grant watched the jury's faces. They'd gone from skeptical to horrified to disgusted. Gertrude couldn't see it. She was still talking, still explaining, still convinced she could make them understand. When Ramos finally got her off the stand, cutting her testimony short in damage control mode, the harm was done. Gertrude had confessed everything, justified nothing, and revealed herself as exactly what she was. Someone so consumed by the need for control that she'd poisoned a child and called it love. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, child endangerment, criminal conspiracy. Sentencing was set for 6 weeks later. In the interim, Gertrude remained out on bail, but her world had fully collapsed. The last of her properties sold at auction to cover legal fees and debts. Her charitable foundation was dissolved amid investigations into fund misappropriation. Another gift from Ted Holmes' files. Former friends and colleagues issued statements condemning her actions. She was alone, disgraced, and facing significant prison time. On the day of sentencing, Grant arrived early. He prepared his own victim impact statement, though Dr. Houston would be reading Emma's. Melinda was beside him, thinner than she'd been months ago, but stronger in ways that mattered. The courtroom filled. Gertrude entered with Ramos, looking diminished in her orange jumpsuit, no longer able to maintain the facade of respectability. Judge Jeffrey Moyer, no relation to Gertrude despite the shared first name, was known as a fair but firm jurist. He presided over the trial with patience and precision, and Grant had watched him carefully throughout. Dr. Houston read Emma's statement first. It was simple, heartbreaking. "I love my grandmother. I thought she loved me, too. But she hurt me in a way I don't understand. She made me afraid of cookies and afraid of people who say they love me. I don't know if I'll ever trust like that again. I'm only 7, but I know that what she did was wrong and I know I'm safe now because my daddy protected me." Grant's eyes burned. Melinda gripped his hand. Then Grant read his own statement. He spoke about trust betrayed, about the violation of the most fundamental bonds of family, about the calculus of evil masquerading as love. He talked about Emma's nightmares, Melinda's therapy, his own struggle to understand how someone could commit such an act. Gertrude Murphy didn't lose her mind, Grant concluded. She revealed who she'd always been, someone for whom other people exist only as extensions of her will. My daughter wasn't a person to her. She was a possession to be controlled. And when that control was threatened, Gertrude chose to destroy rather than accept. That's not mental illness. That's moral bankruptcy. And it deserves the maximum consequence the law allows. Other impact statements followed from Tabitha, from Emma's teacher, from neighbors who'd watched the family struggle. Even Ted Holmes submitted a written statement detailing the decades of harm Gertrude had caused beyond this single criminal act. Finally, Judge Moyer spoke. Mrs. Murphy, you've been convicted of attempting to murder your granddaughter through deliberate, calculated poisoning. The evidence was overwhelming. Your own testimony confirmed your guilt. But what makes this case particularly egregious is your continued insistence that your actions were justified, that you were somehow the victim or the hero of this situation. You've shown no remorse, no recognition of the profound harm you've caused, no acceptance of responsibility. You've demonstrated a complete inability to see your granddaughter as anything other than an object to be controlled. The law allows me discretion in sentencing. I've reviewed the psychiatric evaluations. I've considered your age and lack of prior criminal record. I've noted the defense's arguments for leniency. I find them unconvincing. You planned this crime over months. You researched dosages. You manufactured opportunities. You attempted to manipulate the legal system to gain custody of a child you were actively poisoning. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a grief-induced breakdown. This was sustained, deliberate, calculating malice. I sentence you to 25 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Additionally, you are permanently enjoined from any contact with the victim or her immediate family. This includes all written, electronic, or third-party communication. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. 25 years for a 63-year-old woman meant likely dying in prison. Gertrude's composure finally cracked. She turned in her seat, searching the courtroom, and her eyes locked on Grant. For a moment, he saw pure hatred there. Rage at being thwarted, fury at losing control, resentment at being held accountable. Then the baifs were escorting her out, and she was gone. Grant felt Melinda sag against him in relief. Around them, people were talking. Reporters were scribbling. Supporters were offering congratulations. But Grant just sat quietly, feeling the weight of the past month settle and then lift. It was over. Emma was safe. Gertrude would spend the rest of her life understanding what it meant to be powerless. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Grant made a brief statement, thanking the prosecutors, the police, the witnesses who'd come forward. He didn't mention his own role in exposing Gertrude's broader corruption. Didn't take credit for the financial and reputational destruction he'd orchestrated. That wasn't the point. The point was that Gertrude Murphy had come for his family, and he'd made sure she'd paid for it in every way that mattered. 6 months later, Grant stood in Emma's new bedroom. Not a new house, but a redecorated space with fresh paint and new furniture she'd chosen herself. The nightmares had decreased. The therapy was working. Emma was laughing more, trusting more, being a kid again. Melinda had filed for a legal name change, dropping Murphy, and reclaiming her maiden name from her father's side. She'd also started her own marketing consultancy, stepping out from under the shadow of trying to live up to Gertrude's expectations. Their marriage was stronger than it had been in years. The crisis had burned away a lot of pretense and revealed what mattered. Grant himself had been promoted at Morrison & Associates. His handling of the situation earning respect from colleagues who'd watched him navigate personal hell while maintaining professional excellence. The Riverside project had been completed ahead of schedule and under budget with affordable housing units already changing lives. He'd also quietly established a foundation using money from the settlement of a civil suit against Gertrude's estate. The foundation provided legal assistance to victims of elder abuse and exploitation, particularly cases involving affluent perpetrators who'd previously escaped accountability. Angelo Roman's investigative series had won awards and led to reforms in how the city handled building code enforcement and political donations. Ted Holmes and the others who helped Grant had seen their own reputations rehabilitated as the full story of Gertrude's corruption emerged. As for Gertrude herself, she was in DeCar Correctional Center, a medium-security women's prison downstate. Grant had heard through the legal grapevine that she'd struggled with the adjustment, the loss of control, the institutional hierarchy, the forced equality with people she'd always considered beneath her. She tried to file appeals, but they'd been denied. Her lawyers had abandoned her when the money ran out. She was alone with the consequences of her choices. Grant didn't feel guilty about that. He protected his family and ensured that someone who'd caused decades of harm finally faced justice. The system had worked, yes, but only because he'd made sure it had all the tools it needed. Sometimes people asked him if he felt like he'd gone too far orchestrating Gertrude's financial and social destruction beyond the criminal prosecution. He always gave the same answer. I didn't destroy Gertrude Murphy. I just made sure everyone could see who she really was. The destruction was already there. I just exposed it. On a Saturday morning in early spring, Grant took Emma to the park. She ran ahead to the swings, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Melinda was beside him, their hands linked. "Do you think she'll ever ask about Gertrude again?" Melinda wondered. "Probably when she's older, she'll have questions." "What will you tell her?" Grant watched his daughter soar higher on the swing, fearless and free. The truth that someone who was supposed to love her tried to hurt her. That we protected her, that justice was served, and that she's safe now. That's all. That's everything. Emma jumped from the swing at the ark's peak, landed in the mulch, and came running back to them, grinning and grass-stained, and perfectly wonderfully alive. Grant caught her in his arms and held her close. This child who'd been targeted by someone's twisted version of love and had survived because her father refused to let evil win. Gertrude had wanted to control Emma's future, to shape her into some idealized version. Instead, she'd lost everything while Emma gained something more valuable. Parents who'd proven they'd move heaven and earth to keep her safe. That was the real victory, not the prison sentence or the financial ruin or the public disgrace. The victory was Emma's laughter, Melinda's healing, their family's future unburdened by Gertrude's poison. Grant had learned he was capable of calculated revenge, of strategic destruction, of cold fury in defense of those he loved. Those weren't qualities he thought he possessed. But he'd also learned he was capable of surviving hell and building something better on the other side. And as he walked back to the car with his wife and daughter, Grant Reeves knew with absolute certainty that he'd do it all again if he had to. Because that's what you did when someone came for your family. You protected them. You fought back. And you made damn sure the people who tried to hurt them understood exactly what they'd lost.
That brings this story to an end, and that one was definitely a wild ride. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, let's move into the next story, titled,
I entered my wife's birthday party with flowers only to see my wife's rich ex-lover on one knee proposing to her. Will you leave your poor husband and marry me? Then my wife said yes. So I walked away quietly and dropped my gift on the table. Minutes later, after she opened my gift, I had 227 missed calls and someone knocked at my door. You know that moment when your whole world shifts and you're standing there like an idiot holding flowers while your life gets auctioned off to the highest bidder? Yeah. Welcome to my Tuesday night. I stepped into the private lounge of the Meridian Tower because of course it had to be at Tristan's building, clutching white lees like they were going to somehow fix whatever train wreck was about to unfold. The small black box in my other hand felt heavier than it should have considering what was inside. But we'll get to that little surprise later. This was supposed to be Selena's birthday party, my wife's 32nd to be exact. The woman I'd been married to for 4 years, who I'd watched build her lifestyle brand a claw award from our kitchen table into something that could afford parties like this. The room screamed money in that understated way rich people love. Crystal glasses that probably cost more than most people's rent. A string quartet that wasn't playing background music so much as providing a soundtrack to everyone's carefully curated conversations, and champagne that bubbled like liquid gold under lights that cost more than my first car. But the real showstopper, that wall of glass overlooking the Hudson River, where Manhattan twinkled like it was auditioning for a movie about successful people doing successful things. The kind of view that makes you feel important just for being in the same room with it. I should have known something was up when I walked in and felt the energy shift. You know that feeling when you enter a room and suddenly everyone's trying really hard to look like they're not looking at you? Like they all got the memo about some big drama that's about to go down and you're the only one still checking your email. The room had maybe 50 people. Selena's circle, some investors, a few influencers who treated socializing like a contact sport, and enough venture capital brothers to start their own cryptocurrency. These weren't the kind of people who did anything small. When they threw parties, they threw statements. When they made moves, they made sure everyone was watching. I was scanning the crowd for my wife when the room suddenly went quiet. Not regular quiet, that theatrical kind of quiet that happens right before someone announces they're pregnant or gets engaged or in this case decides to blow up someone else's marriage on live social media. That's when I saw him. Tristan Hale, looking like he'd stepped out of a Forbes 30 Under 30 wet dream, standing under the chandelier with a microphone in his hand and that smile that had probably closed 1,000 deals and broken twice as many hearts. The man was venture capital royalty, the kind of guy who could fund your startup over brunch and buy your building before dessert. He was also my wife's ex-boyfriend, the one she totally got over but somehow still texted about business opportunities. The one whose name came up just a little too often in conversations about AITAH Award's future growth plans. The one who apparently had been planning this little performance for God knows how long. Tristan looked around the room like he owned it, which, let's be honest, he probably did. And then his eyes found Selena. My wife stood near the bar looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, but also like she'd been expecting this moment her entire life. The contradiction should have been my first clue, but hindsight's always 20/20 when you're watching your marriage get demolished in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tristan said into the mic, his voice carrying that smooth confidence that comes from never having to worry about student loans or whether your car will start in the morning. "I hope you're all enjoying Selena's celebration tonight." The crowd murmured its agreement. Phones already starting to rise like some kind of digital seance because nothing says authentic moment like 40 people recording it for their Instagram stories. "I've known Selena for 8 years, Tristan continued, moving through the crowd like he was working a campaign rally. "I've watched her build something incredible with a claw award. I've seen her turn ideas into reality, dreams into revenue, vision into empire. I felt my grip tighten on the lees. Where exactly was this going? But more than that," he said, stopping right in front of Selena. "I've watched her settle for less than she deserves." And there it was. The knife sliding in smooth and precise. The room held its breath as Tristan dropped to one knee. Actually dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring box that probably cost more than most people's houses. The chandelier light hit the diamond and threw rainbows across the ceiling like some kind of cosmic joke. "Celine Ward," he said, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent room. "Will you leave your poor husband and marry me?" Poor husband. The words hit like a slap, but not because they weren't true. Hell, compared to Tristan's portfolio, I was basically broke. But the way he said it, like I was some kind of obstacle to be removed, some outdated software that needed upgrading. That's what made my blood freeze and boil at the same time. I watched my wife's face, waiting for her to laugh, to tell him he was crazy. To remember that her actual husband was standing 20 feet away holding her birthday flowers like some kind of discount delivery service. But when her eyes met mine, I didn't see shame or surprise or even guilt. I saw relief. Pure, undiluted relief, like she'd been holding her breath for years and could finally exhale. "Yes," she said, her voice clear enough to carry across the room without the microphone. "Yes, I'll marry you." The crowd erupted. Actual cheering like they were at a sports game instead of watching someone's marriage get cremated in public. Phones shot up everywhere, capturing every angle of Tristan sliding that massive rock onto Selene's finger while she smiled like she just won the lottery, which, let's be honest, she probably had. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds watching my wife hug her new fiancé while strangers applauded the destruction of my life. My throat felt tight, like someone had wrapped a cable around my neck and was slowly turning the crank. But then something interesting happened. The tightness cooled just like that, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the emotional temperature in the room. The noise faded to background static and suddenly I could think clearly for the first time in months, maybe years. I walked through the celebrating crowd like I was invisible, which, let's face it, I probably was to most of these people anyway. Made my way to the gift table, a ridiculous spread of expensive boxes and bags that looked like a luxury department store had exploded, and set the white lees down carefully. Then I placed the small black box right on top where everyone could see it. The box that contained 2 very specific items that were going to make this celebration a lot more interesting than anyone expected. But that's a story for later. I turned around and walked toward the exit. Not the main entrance where everyone was still taking selfies with the happy couple, but the service entrance that led to the loading dock. The one that wouldn't require me to navigate through a crowd of people pretending they hadn't just witnessed a public execution. I didn't break anything, didn't throw punches or make speeches or perform for the cameras that were still rolling. I just left quiet as smoke. While behind me, the party continued like nothing had changed. The service door opened onto the loading dock, and the night air hit my face like clean water. After swimming in chlorine all day, the Hudson River stretched out below, dark and infinite, while the city hummed its electric lullaby around me. For the first time in hours, maybe months, I could breathe. The thing about betrayal is that it's almost never a surprise when it finally happens. It's just the end of a long, slow process that you've been watching unfold in real time, making excuses for every red flag until you're standing in a field of them, wondering when everything turned red. I pulled out my phone and looked at the time, 9:47 p.m. perfect. Still plenty of time to make some calls. Because here's what Tristan and Selena and their audience of venture capital vultures didn't know. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. And sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one who's been playing the longest game of all. Time to remind them that invoices are always louder than applause. You want to know the beautiful thing about being underestimated? People stop paying attention to what you're actually doing. They see what they expect to see. In my case, the poor husband with the soft eyes and the quiet demeanor, and they assume that's all there is to the story. Big mistake. I stood in our loft kitchen at 10:15 p.m. still wearing my party clothes, but feeling like I'd shed an entire layer of skin back at that celebration. The kitchen where I'd spent countless Saturday mornings renovating with my own hands and money, ripping out the builder-grade cabinets and installing custom walnut ones that cost more than most people's cars, where I'd rewired the electrical myself because I was too cheap to hire an electrician and too stubborn to live with outlets that didn't work. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was standing in a space I'd literally built while everyone assumed I was just along for the ride in my own life. But here's the thing about being the quiet guy in the room. You get really good at listening and watching, and most importantly remembering. While Selena was building her brand and Tristan was building his empire, I'd been building something, too. Something they never bothered to notice because it didn't come with press releases or TED Talks or photo oots for Forbes. I'd been building a foundation, and foundations by design are supposed to be invisible. Let me break down what Team Tristan and Aline forgot to factor into their little hostile takeover. First, there's my mother's trust. Mom died when I was 25, and she left me something that most people don't get. Actual, honest to God, money. Not buy a yacht, money, but never worry about renegade money. The kind of financial cushion that lets you make moves without desperation clouding your judgment. I never talked about it because frankly it wasn't anyone's business, but it meant that when opportunities came up, I could act fast and think long term, like those shares in Hale Meridian Capital that I'd been quietly accumulating for the past 3 years. Yeah, you heard that right. While Tristan was busy being the face of venture capital success, I was becoming one of his minority shareholders. Not through some dramatic corporate raid or hostile takeover. Just boring methodical purchases through index baskets that no one pays attention to. A few shares here, a small block there, always staying below the reporting thresholds that would trigger disclosure requirements. By my last count, I owned 12.4% of his firm. Not enough to control anything, but definitely enough to make things interesting when combined with other minority shareholders who were getting tired of Tristan's publicity-seeking antics. Then there's AITAH Ward, Selene's precious lifestyle brand, the company that everyone assumed was her baby, built with her vision and her hustle and her Instagram perfect aesthetic. What they didn't know, what she apparently forgot in all the excitement of becoming Mrs. Future Hale, was that I personally guaranteed every single operating line of credit that kept her business running. Every single one. The printing contracts for her packaging guaranteed by Julian Reyes. The shipping agreements with her logistics partners. Julian Reyes personal guarantor. The credit lines with her suppliers. You guessed it. When banks looked at AITAH Ward's financials and saw a lifestyle brand with inconsistent cash flow, they saw risk. When they saw my signature on the guarantee forms, they saw stability. I'd spent 4 years building relationships with vendors across printing, shipping, and retail tech. Not because I wanted to be the puppet master behind Selene's success, but because someone had to handle the boring stuff while she focused on being the face of the brand. Someone had to make sure the invoices got paid and the shipments arrived on time and the credit facilities stayed current. Guess who that someone was? The funny thing is, I actually enjoyed it. There's something satisfying about building systems that work, creating processes that run smoothly, establishing relationships based on trust and reliability rather than flash and personality. While Selena was at industry conferences talking about disrupting the lifestyle space, I was in warehouse offices in Queens making sure her products actually got to customers who ordered them. But the real kicker, the detail that was going to turn tonight from embarrassing to catastrophic for the happy couple, was the postnuptial agreement we'd signed 2 years ago. You see, after AITAH Ward started taking off and Selena began getting attention from investors, her lawyer suggested we clarify our financial arrangements, protect the business interests, separate personal assets from corporate ones, that sort of thing. Very reasonable, very modern, very much in keeping with how successful couples handle money in the 21st century. What that postnup actually said in very clear black and white language was that any business ventures launched during our marriage using jointly held assets or credit facilities would be subject to specific division protocols in the event of separation or divorce. And since I guaranteed most of AITAH Ward's operating expenses, and since those guarantees were secured against assets I brought into the marriage, well, let's just say the math was about to get very interesting for everyone involved. The best part, tonight's party itself was funded through my merchant services account. The venue, the catering, the string quartet, the crystal glasses, the champagne, all of it running through payment rails that I'd established and that I controlled. When the venue manager ran Selene's corporate card for the final bill, the transaction was going to hit my underwriting system, the system that I could shut down with a phone call. I looked around our kitchen, my kitchen, and started making a mental inventory of all the things that existed because I'd made them exist. The custom cabinets I designed and installed, the commercial-grade appliances I'd researched and purchased, the smart home system I programmed to control everything from lighting to temperature to security. The apartment itself was in my name, purchased with money from my mother's trust before Selena and I were even engaged. The insurance policies, the utility accounts, the maintenance contracts, all tied to my social security number and my credit score and my bank accounts. Everyone thought I was just the calm husband with the soft eyes standing quietly in the background while more interesting people did more interesting things. They saw what they wanted to see, a supporting character in someone else's story. What they missed was that I'd been writing the story all along. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. 3 calls to make. 3 people who understood that business was business regardless of whatever personal drama was playing out on social media right now. Amara Okafor, my attorney. Luis Mendoza, my banker. Nua Khalid, my operations lead. The people who knew exactly what I'd built and how it all worked and what would happen when I decided to stop being quite so supportive. The funny thing about foundations is that they're invisible until you remove them. Then suddenly, everyone notices what was holding everything up. Time to give Tristan and Selena a crash course in structural engineering. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen island I'd installed myself, and started making calls. Outside, the city glittered like a circuit board. All those lights powered by invisible infrastructure that most people never thought about. Just like the infrastructure I'd built around my own life. The infrastructure I was about to shut down. You know what's better than having friends? Having friends who don't ask stupid questions when you call them at 10:30 p.m. and say, "I need to burn some bridges tonight and I need your help." The first call went to Amara Okafor. Amara is the kind of lawyer who makes other lawyers nervous at dinner parties. She doesn't do small talk, doesn't bill for phone calls that last under 5 minutes, and has never, in the 8 years I've known her, asked me to explain why I need something done. She just asks when and how much. Julian, she answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting for my call. I saw the Instagram stories. Congratulations on your freedom. See what I mean? No wasted time on how are you feeling or are you okay? Or any of that emotional support nonsense that just slows things down when you're trying to execute a plan. Straight to business, which is why Amara bills $400 an hour and worth every penny. I need the envelope opened, I said. Which envelope? Separation and asset control. The one we drafted 6 months ago. There was a pause, but not the kind of pause that means someone's thinking about whether they should do something. The kind of pause that means someone's already opening their laptop and pulling up the right files. The nuclear option, she said. You sure about this timing? The optics aren't great. Dumping your wife on her birthday after she gets engaged to someone else. The optics were never going to be great, I said. And the timing is perfect. She just gave me cause. Material misrepresentation of marital commitment, Amara said, and I could hear her typing. Public humiliation constituting emotional abuse, breach of fiduciary duty regarding jointly held business interests. Yeah, I can work with this. This is why I love working with professionals. They don't need 30 minutes of emotional backstory to understand the assignment. How fast can you file emergency motion for asset preservation? I can have it in the system by midnight. Temporary restraining orders on the joint accounts by morning. Full separation paperwork by end of week. Do it. Consider it done. Anything else? Yeah. Make sure the filing includes the post-nut provisions about business guarantees. All of them. Another pause. This one with some actual weight behind it. Julian, you realize that's going to freeze her company operations, right? Like completely. I realize that. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with a lot of things tonight that I wasn't okay with this morning. Fair enough. I'll send you the filing confirmation once it's submitted. Click done. 1 down. The second call went to Luis Mendoza. Luis runs the private banking division at Meridian Financial. Yeah, the same building where tonight's little drama went down, which is either ironic or cosmic justice, depending on how you look at it. He's the guy who handles accounts for people who have enough money to need someone like Louise, but not so much money that they're worth Goldman Sachs' time. Perfect sweet spot for someone like me. Julian, my friend, Louise answered in that voice that somehow managed to sound both relaxed and completely alert. Working late tonight. I need some account adjustments. I said tonight. What kind of adjustments are we talking about? The kind that protect my interests while other people figure out what their interests actually are. Louise laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. More like the laugh of someone who'd been waiting for this call for months. You want to talk about this on the phone or should I assume you're already thinking 3 moves ahead? I'm thinking 5 moves ahead. Can you handle a time-boxed fund sweep at 2,359? I can handle whatever you need handled. What are we sweeping? Everything that runs through my merchant rails. Everything guaranteed against my assets. Everything authorized under my signature, including her business accounts, especially her business accounts. There was some keyboard clicking on Louie's end. The sound of someone pulling up multiple screens and cross-referencing account numbers and authorization codes. Okay, I'm looking at the structure here. Louise said, "This is going to be comprehensive. You sure you want to do this all at once?" Louise, in about 12 hours, Selena's going to wake up and realize she just blew up her marriage on live television. Then she's going to call her lawyer, who's going to tell her to freeze every account she can get her hands on. I'd rather not give her that opportunity. Makes sense. What about timing on the merchant holds? Immediate. And I want authorization rekeyed on anything that currently runs automatic payments. So if someone tries to run her company card, it gets declined. Even if it's for something that was pre-authorized, especially if it's for something that was pre-authorized. More typing. Louise was the kind of banker who never made you explain the same thing twice, which is probably why his clients trusted him with 8-figure account balances. Alright, I've got the framework set up. Sweep executes at 2359. Holds go active immediately after. Rekeying happens overnight. You'll get confirmation emails for everything. Thanks, Louise. Julian, for what it's worth, I saw the videos. She handled that badly. Yeah, well, live and learn. Right. Anything else you need tonight? Just make sure everything posts before she thinks to call her own banker. Consider it handled. Click. 2 down. The third call went to Norcolid. Nor is my operations lead, which is a fancy way of saying she's the person who actually makes things happen while everyone else is busy having meetings about making things happen. She manages vendor relationships for 3 different companies I'm involved with, knows more about supply chain logistics than most people know about their own jobs, and has never, in the 4 years we've worked together, failed to deliver on a deadline. Also, she's got the kind of mind that can look at a complex system and immediately see where all the pressure points are. Julian, she said when she picked up, this is either about the Instagram thing or you're calling to tell me we're expanding operations. Given the time, I'm guessing it's the Instagram thing. It's the Instagram thing. I need a network pause. Which network? AITAH Ward. Everything. Or just the new stuff. Everything. Shipments, payments, auto-renewals, pinning orders. I want it all stopped, reversed, and clawed back to our facilities pending new authorization. Nor was quiet for about 10 seconds, which in Norm is like a 5-minute conversation. Julian, that's going to strand about $40,000 worth of product in transit, plus whatever sitting in third-party fulfillment centers. I know. And it's going to burn some relationships with vendors who thought they were dealing with a stable operation. I know that, too. And Selena's going to wake up tomorrow to discover that her entire business has basically been turned off. That's the idea. Another pause. Are you sure about this? Because once I send these messages, there's no taking them back quietly. This is going to make noise. Nor I've been guaranteeing her business operations for 4 years. Today, she decided she didn't need me anymore. I'm just helping her get what she wanted. Fair enough. How do you want me to handle the vendor communications? Clean and professional operational pause pinning authorization review from primary guarantor. No drama, no explanations, just business. And if they ask questions, tell them to call me. I'll be available. Okay. This is going to take me about an hour to execute properly. You want status updates? Just confirmation when it's done. You got it, Juliet? Yeah, for what it's worth, I never understood why you let her treat your support like it was invisible. Well, now it's about to become very visible, I guess. So, I'll get this started. Click. 3 for 3. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and looked at the time. 11:08 p.m. Less than an hour until Louis' sweep executed. Less than an hour until Amara's filings hit the system. Less than an hour until Noor's network messages started propagating through vendor systems from Brooklyn to Bangladesh. I made myself a cup of tea. The good stuff, the Earl Grey that Selena always said was too expensive for everyday use, and sat down to wait. The beautiful thing about having the right people in your corner is that you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to justify your decisions or defend your choices or convince anyone that you're doing the right thing. You just have to point them at the target and let them work. And in about 52 minutes, Celine and Tristan were about to discover that the quiet guy in the background had been holding all the important pieces together. Time to see what happens when those pieces stop being held. You want to know the difference between revenge and justice? Revenge is emotional. Justice is paperwork. That little black box I left on the gift table wasn't some dramatic gesture or cryptic message designed to make people wonder what the mysterious husband was thinking. It was a business communication, professional, precise, and absolutely devastating in its simplicity. C. While everyone was busy taking selfies with the newly engaged couple and posting stories about true love conquering all or whatever hashtag bullshit they were using, nobody bothered to check the gifts. Why would they? It's a birthday party, not Christmas morning. Presents are for later after the champagne runs out and people start getting bored with congratulating themselves for witnessing history. But around midnight, when the party finally started winding down, and Selena realized she should probably at least acknowledge the pile of expensive boxes that people had brought to celebrate her existence, someone was going to open that box. And that's when the real party would begin. Inside that innocent-looking black jewelry box, the kind you get from boutique stores that charge $300 for earrings, were two items that were going to turn Selena's engagement celebration into a crash course in contract law. First item, a silver key, not just any key. This was the key to safe deposit box number 247 at Meridian Trust, the bank in the basement of the same building where we just watched my marriage get publicly executed. Box number 247 contained the original documents for our postnuptial agreement, signed and notarized copies of every vendor guarantee I'd personally backed for a claward, and the venue contract addendum for tonight's party. You know, the addendum that clearly stated in Section 12C that if the primary event sponsor withdrew support due to material misrepresentation of the nature or purpose of the event, all associated costs would immediately transfer to the personal accounts of the named beneficiary. The beneficiary being one Celine Ward, soon to be Selena Hale, who was about to discover that her fairy tale engagement party came with a 6F-figure or price tag that her business credit cards couldn't cover. But the key was just the appetizer. The real main course was item number 2, a simple white card, business size, with 4 lines of text in that clean, professional font that makes everything sound official and unavoidable. Notice of sponsor withdrawal effective immediately. Chargeback authorization number 7 refs rescission of power of attorney for a claw ward operations Read the attached barcode. Yeah, that's right. A QR code. Because nothing says, your life is about to get complicated quite like having to pull out your phone to scan a barcode that's going to show you exactly how complicated it's about to get. When Selena scanned that code, and she would scan it because curiosity killed the cat, and Selena had always been very, very curious about anything that might affect her business. It would open a link to a dashboard I'd had Nor build 3 months ago. Not because I was planning this exact scenario, but because I'd learned a long time ago that information is power and real-time information is nuclear power. The dashboard was beautiful in its simplicity. Clean white background, a Clawwords logo at the top, and a series of status tiles that normally showed green check marks next to things like venue deposits confirmed and vendor payments current and credit facilities active. Tonight though, Selena was going to watch those green check marks turn red in real time. Venue funds withdrawn * 11:47 p.m. Floral arrangements cancelled * 11:52 p.m. Photography license revoked * 11:58 p.m. Jewelry gifts flagged as unauthorized corporate purchases * 12:03 a.m. But the real kicker, the tile that was going to make Tristan's champagne taste like vinegar, was the one at the bottom of the screen. Hale Meridian Capital Minority Block activated 12.4% *. C. Tristan thought he was hot because he controlled the board at his venture capital firm. What he didn't know was that I'd been quietly building relationships with other minority shareholders over the past 18 months. Not the flashy investors who wanted their names on Forbes lists, but the boring institutional guys who cared more about returns than recognition. Coffee meetings in Midtown, lunch at places that don't have Instagram accounts, conversations about governance and oversight, and the importance of keeping high-profile partners from making decisions that could create reputational risk for the firm. Turns out, a lot of Tristan's investors weren't thrilled with his tendency to make business decisions based on his personal life. Funny how that works. So, when my 12.4% stake activated its voting block provisions, the ones buried in Section 47 of the partnership agreement that nobody reads because it's about as exciting as watching paint dry, it would automatically trigger a defensive position with the other minority shareholders. I'd been courting. Suddenly, Tristan's controlling interest wasn't quite so controlling anymore. The beautiful thing about the dashboard was that it updated in real time. So Celine could watch her world fall apart in high definition with timestamps and confirmation numbers and all the professional courtesy of a bank statement. No drama, no emotional manipulation, no screaming or crying or throwing things. Just the cold hard facts of what happens when you mistake someone's support for weakness. By now, Louis' sweep would be executing. Amara's emergency filings would be hitting the court system. Nor's vendor messages would be propagating through fulfillment networks from here to Hong Kong. And somewhere in a private lounge overlooking the Hudson River, my wife was about to discover that the man she just traded in for a newer model had been the one keeping her engine running all along. I imagined Celine's face when she realized that those jewelry gifts Tristan had been sending her, the diamond tennis bracelet, the vintage Cartier watch, the ruby earrings that showed up just because had all been purchased using a Claw Awards corporate accounts. Accounts that I guaranteed accounts that were about to be frozen pending a full audit of personal versus business expenses. The IRS was going to have some very interesting questions about those gifts. Questions that would require lawyers to answer expensive lawyers. I imagined Tristan's face when he realized that his romantic gesture, proposing in public, making it a social media moment, turning my humiliation into his victory lap, had just triggered the minority shareholder revolt he'd been worried about for 2 years. The board meeting on Monday was going to be fascinating. But most of all, I imagined the moment when both of them realized that the quiet guy they dismissed as irrelevant had been playing a completely different game than they thought. They were playing house. I was playing chess. And I'd been thinking 5 moves ahead since the day Selena first mentioned that Tristan was just helping with some business connections. The QR code would also give them access to one more thing, my new contact information, because after tonight, the old phone number wasn't going to work anymore. The old email wasn't going to work anymore. The old Julian who smiled and nodded and paid for everything while pretending not to notice what was happening wasn't going to work anymore. If they wanted to talk to me, and they were definitely going to want to talk to me, they were going to have to go through Amara. And Amara, as I mentioned, doesn't do small talk. I finished my Earl Grey and looked at the clock. 11:43 p.m. 17 minutes until the midnight sweep. 17 minutes until Celine's credit card started getting declined. 17 minutes until the most expensive birthday party in Manhattan history became the most expensive mistake in Selena Ward's carefully curated life. Time to see if love really could conquer all, especially when all included a 6F-figure bill and a minority shareholder revolt. You know that moment in horror movies when everything goes quiet right before all hell breaks loose? Yeah, that lasted about 12 minutes. At exactly 12:03 a.m., my phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree that was also somehow on fire. The first call came from Selena. Obviously, I let it go to voicemail because honestly, what was she going to say? Hey honey, just wanted to chat about how I got engaged to someone else at my birthday party and also my credit cards aren't working and also what's this thing about minority shareholder blocks and also are you completely insane? The second call came 30 seconds later. Also, Selena also sent to voicemail. The third call, Selena again, but this time she was clearly panic dialing because the ring lasted about 2 seconds before she hung up and immediately called back. By 12:15, I had 27 missed calls. By 12:30, it was 63. By 1:00 a.m. my phone had basically given up trying to keep count and just started vibrating continuously like it was having some kind of electronic seizure. I turned the phone face down on my kitchen counter and went to make another cup of tea. Earl Grey again. Because apparently I was having a very expensive night in more ways than one. The beautiful thing about letting people panic call you is that it gives you a real-time reading of their mental state. The progression from confused to concerned to completely losing there is fascinating to watch even when you can't actually hear the conversations. Call pattern analysis. NUA had taught me. You can learn a lot about a crisis by tracking who calls when and how often. Selena every 30 seconds for the first hour. Classic denial phase. She was still thinking this was some kind of misunderstanding that could be cleared up with the right conversation. Mary Soul, Selena's sister, every 5 minutes starting at 12:45. Someone had filled her in on the situation and she was trying to play mediator. Good luck with that, Marissa. Tristan's assistant, Rhea, calling every 2 minutes starting at 1:15, which meant Tristan had figured out the Hale Meridian angle and was now in full damage control mode, probably trying to schedule an emergency board meeting to explain why his personal life was suddenly threatening his professional one. Quinn LaMere, Celine's PR fixer. 3 calls then nothing. Quinn was smart enough to know when a situation was beyond spin control. When your client gets engaged to someone else's husband and then her entire business collapses in the same night, that's not a messaging problem. That's a maybe we should all lawyer up problem. The venue manager. 7 calls between 1:30 and 2 a.m. Someone was discovering that their 6F-figure deposit had been clawed back and they had a very expensive party to clean up with no way to get paid for it. The florist. 2 calls. Apparently, someone had tried to cancel the flower arrangements after they had already been delivered. Awkward. The string quartet leader. 1 call at 2:15 a.m. I actually felt a little bad about this one. Musicians don't get paid enough to deal with rich people's personal drama. Even the valet captain called the valet captain, which meant the night had gotten so messy that even the parking guys were confused about who was supposed to pay for what. But the really interesting calls were the ones that started coming in around 2:30 a.m. numbers I didn't recognize. Area codes from all over the country. A few international numbers that my phone marked as possible spam, but that I knew weren't spam at all. Those were the minority shareholders. Because apparently when you activate a defensive voting block at a major venture capital firm, word travels fast. And when word travels fast in finance circles, people start making phone calls to figure out what the hell is happening and whether they need to protect their own interests. I could practically hear the conversations happening in home offices and hotel rooms from here to Hong Kong. Did you see the filing? What filing? The emergency governance review at Hale Meridian. Who called for it? Some guy named Reyes. Minority shareholder. Apparently Tristan just made a very public decision that could constitute reputational risk. What kind of decision? The kind where you propose to someone else's wife at a party that's being live-streamed on Instagram. Jesus Christ. Yeah. And get this, the husband owns 12% of the firm. Cue panic calling. The thing about finance people is that they don't care about your personal life until it affects their money. But the second your personal life threatens their returns, they become very interested in your personal life very quickly. And Tristan's little romantic gesture had just made his personal life everyone's business. By 3 a.m., I had 184 missed calls. By 4 a.m. it was 227 and my phone had started sending me battery warnings because it had been vibrating nonstop for 4 hours. I finally turned the damn thing off and went to bed. Well, I tried to go to bed. Hard to sleep when you can hear your downs. Apparently, some enterprising reporter had figured out where I lived and was calling everyone in the building trying to get someone to buzz them up. Good luck with that, too. My building's got the kind of security that requires 2 forms of ID and a blood sample just to get past the front desk. At 5:30 a.m., my door intercom bust. Hugo, the night concierge, sounding like he'd been dealing with this kind of thing for years. Mr. Reyes, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a gentleman from Hale Meridian Capital downstairs says it's urgent. I looked at the intercom camera screen. Young guy in an expensive suit that looked like it had been slept in. Carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of stressed expression that you get when your boss sends you to clean up a mess at 5:30 in the morning. What's his name? I asked. Marcus Webb says he's from their legal department. Of course he was. Tristan was sending lawyers now. Probably figured that if he couldn't reach me directly, maybe he could intimidate me through official channels. Tell Mr. Webb that if he wants to schedule a meeting, he can contact my attorney, Amara Okafor at Steinberg & Associates. Her office opens at 9 o'clock and if he says it can't wait until 9 o'clock, tell him that everything waits until 9. And Hugo, yes, sir. Offer him some water. He looks like he needs it. Very good, sir. I turned off the intercom and looked out my bedroom window. The sun was starting to come up over the East River, painting the sky that weird orange color that makes Manhattan look like it's on fire. Down on the street, I could see news vans starting to gather. Not the big network trucks, but those smaller operations that chase local stories and social media drama. Someone had figured out that last night's engagement party was connected to a bigger story, and now they wanted to be here when the other shoe dropped. They were going to be waiting a while. See, the thing about creating a financial avalanche is that it takes time for all the rocks to finish falling. What happened at midnight was just the first tremor. The real earthquake was going to hit when the markets opened and people started trying to figure out what the hell had happened to Claw Ward's credit facilities and why Hale Meridian Capital was suddenly calling emergency board meetings. I made coffee, the good stuff, because why not, and sat down at my kitchen table to wait for my phone to start working again. 227 missed calls in one night. That had to be some kind of record. Too bad I wasn't planning to return any of them. You know what's funny about desperate people? They always think the rules don't apply to them when they're in crisis mode. Like somehow their emergency becomes everyone else's emergency and basic courtesy goes out the window because they're having a bad night. The knock came at exactly 12:08 a.m. I know because I was watching the clock, waiting for Louis' sweep to execute at midnight. 3 sharp raps on my door, the kind that says official business, but with an undertone of please don't make this harder than it has to be. I looked through the peephole and had to suppress a laugh. Ria Morani and Quinn LaMere standing in my hallway like the world's most expensive door-to-door sales team. Both of them looked like they'd been dragged through a hedge backwards, which was particularly impressive considering they'd been dressed for a high-end party about 2 hours ago. Ria was Tristan's assistant, the kind of person who could schedule a hostile takeover between lunch meetings and make it look effortless. Normally, she had that unflappable executive assistant energy that could handle anything from booking private jets to managing PR disasters. Tonight, she looked like someone who'd just discovered that her boss's romantic gesture had accidentally triggered a financial nuclear bomb. Quinn was Selena's PR fixer, a woman who'd built a career on making problems disappear before they became problems. She specialized in reputation management for lifestyle brands, which was a fancy way of saying she cleaned up messes for people who couldn't afford to have messes. Usually, she looked like she could spin a natural disaster into a brand partnership opportunity. Tonight, she looked like she was personally having the natural disaster. Both of them were pale in that specific way that happens when someone realizes they're dealing with a situation that's way above their pay grade. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, not inviting them in. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is make people say their piece while standing in a hallway. Julian Quinn started her hands up in that universal gesture of "I come in peace. This is all just a misunderstanding." I looked at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable. Quinn was used to controlling conversations, steering narratives, managing the flow of information. Making her stand in my hallway at midnight while she tried to figure out what to say was probably the most off balance she'd been in years. "Nothing is misunderstood," I finally said, keeping my voice calm and level. "Everything is documented." That hit them both like a slap. You could see the realization dawning that this wasn't some emotional outburst they could talk me down from. This was business. Cold, calculated, and completely legal business. Rhea stepped forward, pulling a manila folder from her bag with the kind of careful precision that meant she'd been practicing this moment in her head for the last hour. "Julian, I know tonight was difficult," she said, using that careful diplomatic language that people use when they're trying not to admit how badly someone screwed up. "But Mr. Hale wanted me to bring you these proposals, bridge agreements, temporary accommodations, ways we can work together to make sure everyone comes out of this hole." She held the folder toward me like it was some kind of peace offering. I could see the edge of a letterhead that probably started with "in consideration of mutual benefit" and ended with "please don't destroy my client's life." I took the folder, flipped it open, and spent exactly 30 seconds scanning the contents. Standard damage control stuff. Hush agreements disguised as consulting contracts. Non-disclosure agreements wrapped in financial settlements. A "don't embarrass her publicly" clause that was probably Quinn's contribution. The kind of paperwork that rich people use to make problems go away quietly. I closed the folder and handed it back to Rhea. "The best non-disclosure agreement in the world," I said, "is silence I owe myself." Both of them stared at me like I'd just spoken in ancient Greek. But Julian Quinn tried again. "We can make this work for everyone. Selena never meant for things to go this far. The engagement, the public announcement, it all happened so fast. People get caught up in the moment, you know." "Yeah," I said. "I know exactly how people get caught up in the moment." I watched it happen for about 10 minutes while I stood in the back of the room holding birthday flowers. Quinn winced. Rhea looked down at her expensive shoes. "Look," Rhea said, trying the Tristan angle. "Mr. Hale has significant resources. He can make everyone whole. Whatever tonight cost, whatever disruption this causes, he's prepared to cover all of it. He should start with himself." I replied. That's when I pulled out a copy of the venue contract addendum from my back pocket. The one I'd been carrying around since this afternoon when I'd had a feeling this conversation was going to happen eventually. I handed it to Quinn because she was the one who supposedly understood legal documents and their implications. "Section 12C. I said helpfully. "Primary sponsor withdrawal due to material misrepresentation." Quinn's face went from pale to white as she read. You could practically see her brain doing the math, calculating the total cost of tonight's party, and realizing that every penny of it was about to become Selena's personal responsibility. The venue rental, the catering, the string quartet, the flowers, the champagne, the photographer, the security, even the valet service. All of it reverting to Celine Ward's personal accounts because the woman who'd just gotten engaged to someone else had somehow forgotten to mention that little detail when she'd booked a party using her husband's credit facilities. "This can't be legal," Quinn said. But her voice had that hollow quality that meant she knew it absolutely was legal. "It's very legal," I confirmed. "It's also very enforceable and very expensive." Rhea tried one more time, reaching for the folder again. "Julian, Mr. Hale can write a check tonight. Whatever the number is, he can cover it. He just wants to avoid any unnecessary complications." "Unnecessary complications," I repeated like minority shareholder revolts. The color that had just started returning to Rhea's face disappeared again. "You know about the board meeting," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know about a lot of things," I said. "I know about emergency governance reviews. I know about reputational risk assessments. I know about what happens when the guy who's supposed to be making sound financial decisions for other people's money decides to propose to someone else's wife on Instagram Live." Both women looked like they wanted to be literally anywhere else in the world. "What do you want?" Quinn asked, finally cutting through all the diplomatic and getting to the point. It was a fair question and I had a fair answer. I want accuracy. I said I want Celine to sign the separation agreement that my lawyer is filing tomorrow morning. I want her to return every penny she spent from company lines for personal expenses. I want her to issue a public statement in her own words, not yours, acknowledging that I built what I built and she chose what she chose. And after that, I want all of us to go very, very quiet. And if she does all that, Rhea asked, then she gets to keep her business and her reputation and her new fiancé. And Tristan gets to keep his board seat and his controlling interest and his shiny public image. And if she doesn't, I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. Then we find out exactly how much damage one very quiet minority shareholder can do when he stops being quiet. I stepped back into my apartment and started to close the door. Wait, Quinn called out. How do we reach you? Your phone's going straight to voicemail. You don't reach me. I said, you reach my attorney, Amara Okaper at Steinberg & Associates. She'll be expecting your call. And I closed the door gently, leaving them standing in the hallway with their folder full of hush money and their slowly dawning realization that they were dealing with someone who'd been planning this conversation for a lot longer than they'd been dreading it. Through the peephole, I watched them stand there for another 30 seconds, probably trying to figure out what the hell they were going to tell their clients. Good luck with that. You know what they say about death by 1,000 cuts. Turns out financial death only takes about 7. At exactly 23:59, while Rhea and Quinn were probably still standing in my hallway trying to figure out how to explain to their clients that diplomacy had failed, Louise executed the sweep. I didn't need to watch it happen in real time. Louise was thorough enough to set up automated confirmations that would hit my email every time a transaction processed. But I'll admit, there was something deeply satisfying about sitting in my kitchen with a cup of Earl Grey, watching my phone light up with notifications as the financial infrastructure of Celine's carefully curated life systematically shut down. 12 o'clock and 1 second. Authorization revoked. AITAH Ward Corporate AMX** 12 o'clock and 3 seconds. Authorization revoked. Celine Ward Personal AMX Business Guarantee ** 12 o'clock and 7 seconds. Authorization revoked. Merchant account number 4471 to 982 ** 12 o'clock and 12 seconds. Hold placed. Joint checking account #SS 4492 ** 12 o'clock and 18 seconds. Hold placed business line of credit #lock 8847 *. The beautiful thing about modern banking is that everything happens instantly. No waiting for business hours, no processing delays, no grace periods. 1 minute your credit cards work, the next minute they don't. And there's no middle ground where you can charm your way through a transaction. The first casualty was the gown stylist. Apparently, Selena had arranged for some designer dress situation for the after-party because obviously the outfit that was good enough for getting engaged wasn't fancy enough for celebrating the engagement. The stylist tried to run her card for the rental fee at 12:23 a.m. and got the kind of decline message that makes retail workers nervous. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, this is Madison from Atelier Block. Is there another payment method for Ms. Ward's evening gown rental? The card on file was declined. I deleted the text without responding. Not my problem anymore. The after-party lounge was next. See, when you get engaged at a birthday party in Manhattan, apparently the thing to do is immediately migrate to another venue where everyone can continue celebrating your life choices while running up another 5-figure bar tab. Celine and Tristan had booked a private room at some rooftop place in Soho, the kind of spot that charges $300 for a bottle of champagne that costs $30 at the store. At 12:47 a.m., the venue manager called me directly. Mr. Reyes, this is David from Skyline Lounge. We're having an issue with the payment authorization for the Ward party. The card we have on file is being declined, and Ms. Ward suggested we contact you. The audacity was almost impressive. Celine had given them my number as backup payment even after getting engaged to someone else 2 hours earlier, like I was some kind of customer service department for her lifestyle choices. I'm not responsible for Ms. Ward's expenses, I said politely. You'll need to work that out directly with her. But sir, we have a signed agreement that lists you as the guarantor for check the timestamp on that agreement. I interrupted. Any authorization I provided was revoked as of midnight tonight. There was a pause while David presumably looked at his paperwork and realized that his very expensive party was suddenly his very expensive problem. What should I tell the guests? He asked. Tell them to talk to the happy couple about payment arrangements. I hung up and added David's number to my block list. Poor guy was just doing his job, but I wasn't running a charity for other people's celebration expenses. The catering company was the third to fall. These were the vendors who'd provided the elaborate spread at the birthday party. Caviar service, champagne tower, Those ridiculous little appetizers that cost $40 per bite and taste like disappointment. They'd been scheduled to clean up and clear out by 1 a.m., but apparently someone had tried to add some last-minute charges to the bill. Maybe additional champagne for the impromptu engagement celebration. Maybe overtime fees for dealing with the extended party. Maybe just the standard rich people tax that high-end vendors add when they think they can get away with it. Doesn't matter what it was. The payment bounced harder than a rubber ball on concrete. The catering manager, a woman named Elena, who sounded like she'd been dealing with rich peoples for about 20 years too long, called Selena directly to sort out the payment issue. I know this because I could hear Selene's voice through Elena's phone when she called me at 1:15 a.m. Mr. Reyes, this is Elena from Prestige Catering. I have Miss Ward here and she's saying there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the payment authorization. In the background, I could hear Selena frantically trying to explain something about technical difficulties and temporary holds and how this was all just a big mix-up that would be sorted out in the morning. There's no misunderstanding, I told Elena. Ms. Ward is responsible for her own expenses now. You'll need to work out payment arrangements directly with her, but the original contract was nullified as of midnight tonight. Check your email for the formal notification because of course Amara had already sent termination notices to every vendor who'd been operating under my guarantees. The woman was nothing if not thorough. Elena sighed the kind of sigh that comes from dealing with rich people drama when you're just trying to get paid for honest work. Ma'am, I heard her say to Selena, you're going to need to provide an alternative payment method or we're going to have to hold the equipment until this gets resolved. The line went quiet and then I heard Selene's voice closer to the phone now. Julian, please. This is insane. People are watching. There are photographers here. You're humiliating me. I left your party without making a scene, I said calmly. You've humiliated our marriage. I'm just correcting the accounting. What do you want? She asked. And for the first time all night, her voice cracked a little. Money, an apology. Time to think about this. I want accuracy, I said. I want you to sign the separation papers my lawyer is filing in the morning. I want you to pay back every penny you've spent from company accounts for personal expenses. I want you to issue a public statement in your own words, not Quinn's, acknowledging what I built and what you chose. After that, we go quiet. The line was silent for a long moment. Then I heard the sentence I'd been expecting for months, maybe years. You were never enough, Julian. There it was. The truth that had been hiding behind all the smiles and social media posts and carefully curated couple photos. The truth that had been sitting in the room during every dinner party and business meeting and quiet evening at home. I wasn't enough. I had never been enough. I was convenient. I was useful. I was financially reliable, but I wasn't enough. You're right, I said. I was more than enough. I was convenient. And I hung up. By 2 a.m., the damage reports were rolling in like storm updates. Amara's emergency filings had hit the court system exactly on schedule. The temporary financial orders were in place, freezing the 3 joint accounts that Selena used for what she generously called brand expenses. Noor's vendor pause orders had propagated through the supply chain, halting shipments and suspending adbuys from Brooklyn to Bangladesh. But the real masterpiece, the paper cut that was going to leave the deepest scar, arrived in Tristan's email at 2:17 a.m. A formal notice from Santiago, Hale Meridian's compliance chair, confirming that the minority shareholders' defensive bloc had officially called for an emergency governance review of any transactional engagement that presents material reputational risk to the firm's fiduciary responsibilities. The subject line was beautifully dry. Rego Governance Review Protocol. Urgent action required. The meaning was anything but dry. Stand down or face a very public audit of every decision you've made that could be construed as putting your personal interests ahead of your investors' interests. Starting with tonight, I poured myself another cup of tea and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Selena was probably trying to explain to a room full of people why her credit cards weren't working. Somewhere else, Tristan was probably getting his first taste of what it felt like when the people who controlled his money started asking uncomfortable questions about his judgment. And somewhere in between, a bunch of vendors and service providers were learning that rich people's problems become everyone else's problems real fast when the money stops flowing. Paper cuts that bleed. Sometimes the smallest wounds take the longest to heal. You know what's funny about people who never listen? When they finally start listening, they have no idea how to process what they're hearing. By morning, my phone wasn't ringing anymore. It was vibrating like a trapped bee having an existential crisis. The missed call counter had given up somewhere around 300 and just started showing many like my phone had developed a sense of humor about the situation. I made coffee, real coffee from the espresso machine I'd bought myself for Christmas 2 years ago because Celine thought it was too much machine for our kitchen aesthetic. Funny how different things look when you're not worried about someone else's aesthetic preferences. The sun was coming up over the East River, painting the sky that pale gold color that makes Manhattan look almost peaceful if you ignore all the sirens and construction noise and general chaos of 8 million people trying to get somewhere important. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd refinished myself because paying someone else to sand would seem like a waste of money, and watched the city wake up. At 7:23 a.m., I answered one call. "Selena." "Julian," she said, and her voice had that hollow quality that comes from not sleeping and crying and probably drinking too much champagne while your entire life implodes in real time. "Please, you humiliated me." I took a sip of my coffee and looked out at the river. A garbage barge was making its way north, probably headed to some landfill in the Bronx where all of Manhattan's mistakes eventually end up. "I left your party without a scene," I said softly. "You humiliated our vows." "I'm only correcting the ledger." There was a long pause in the background. I could hear voices. Quinn probably, and maybe Marisol, Selena's sister. The damage control team working overtime to figure out how to spin a situation that was fundamentally unspinnable. "What do you want?" Selena asked finally. "Money, an apology? Time to think about this?" It was the same question she'd asked last night, but now it carried real weight. Now she understood that this wasn't some emotional outburst that would blow over if she just waited long enough. This was business, permanent, documented, legally binding business. "I want accuracy," I said, using the same words I'd used 12 hours ago. But this time, I knew she was actually listening. "I want you to sign the separation agreement that Amara is filing this morning. I want you to return every penny you've spent from company accounts for personal expenses. I want you to issue a public statement in your own words, not Quinn's, acknowledging that I built what I built and you chose what you chose. After that, we go quiet." The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. Then I heard her breathing. That shaky kind of breathing that comes right before someone either starts crying or starts screaming. "The separation agreement," she said. "What does it say?" "It says what we both know is true. That our marriage ended months ago. We just forgot to file the paperwork. It divides assets according to who actually earned them and who actually paid for them. It protects your business interests as long as you can fund them yourself. It keeps everything civil and legal and boring and the personal expenses." I pulled out my phone and opened the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for the past 6 months. Yes, a spreadsheet. Because when someone is slowly bleeding your finances dry while planning to leave you, documentation becomes important. "Jewelry purchases through a Claw Ward's corporate accounts," I said, reading from the list. "Total $47,836. Personal travel charge to business expenses $22,412. Business dinners that were actually dates with Tristan $8,963. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "Should I continue?" I asked. "Because I've got 2 more pages." "That's not, those were legitimate business." "Selena." I used the voice I reserved for when someone was about to say something that would make the situation worse for everyone involved. "Don't." Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "The public statement. What exactly do you want me to say?" "The truth. That Julian Reyes provided financial backing, operational support, and infrastructure development for a Claw Ward from inception through current operations. That the success of the company was built on a foundation of shared resources and joint effort. That I chose to prioritize the business over personal recognition. And you chose to prioritize personal opportunities over marital commitments. That makes me sound like someone who made choices, which you did. People will think I'm a gold digger. People who know you will think you're someone who built a business with help and then moved on when better opportunities presented themselves. People who don't know you will think whatever they want to think regardless of what you say. And after that, after I sign everything and pay everything back and humiliate myself publicly. After that, you get to keep your business, your reputation, and your new fiancé. You get to start fresh with someone who can afford your lifestyle without expecting credit for it. You get to be exactly who you want to be with exactly who you want to be with. And you get what? I looked around my kitchen at the cabinets I'd built and the appliances I'd chosen and the view I'd paid for it, the space that was mine because I'd worked for it, not because someone had given it to me or because I'd leveraged someone else's guarantees to afford it. I get accuracy, I said. I get credit for what I built. I get to stop funding a story that erases me. Julian. Her voice broke a little. We were happy once. We were convenient once. I corrected. There's a difference. The line went quiet again. When Selena spoke, it was in that flat tone. That means someone has finally accepted a reality they've been fighting. How long do I have? Amara will send you the paperwork this morning. You have 72 hours to review it with your own lawyer and respond. The financial reconciliation needs to be completed within 30 days. The public statement can happen whenever you're ready. But it needs to happen before the separation agreement is finalized. And if I don't, then we find out how much damage one very quiet minority shareholder can do when he stops being quiet. We find out how much a claw award is worth when its credit facilities disappear overnight. We find out how much Tristan's board position is worth when his investors realize he's making business decisions based on his personal life. You'd really destroy everything we built together. Selena, there is no we anymore. There hasn't been for months. I'm just making it official. The silence that followed was different. Final. Like the moment when you realize that a conversation you've been having for years is finally over. I need to think about this. She said, no, you don't. You need to sign the papers and write the statement and move on with your life. Thinking is what got us into this situation in the first place. That's not fair. Fair would have been having this conversation 6 months ago when you started planning your exit strategy. There would have been not getting engaged to someone else at a party I paid for. There would have been a lot of things that didn't happen. I finished my coffee and looked at the clock. 8:15 a.m. The markets would be opening soon and Santiago would be calling his emergency board meeting, and somewhere in Midtown, Tristan would be discovering that his romantic gesture had accidentally triggered a corporate governance crisis. I have to go, I said. Amara will send you everything you need. Read it carefully. Sign it quickly. And Selena, yeah, next time you want to leave someone, just leave. The dramatic gesture thing doesn't suit you. I hung up and deleted her number from my contacts because accuracy, it turns out, includes knowing when a conversation is finally finished. And this one had been finished for a long time before either of us had the courage to admit it. Time to make some more coffee and wait for the morning news to catch up with what had happened overnight. This was going to be an interesting day. You know what's weird about winning? The moment after everything falls into place, when the dust settles and the chaos stops and you're just sitting there thinking, well, that happened. The day unfolded with the kind of steady rhythm that comes after you've set a bunch of dominoes in motion, and now you just get to watch them fall. At 9:15 a.m., my email pinged with a confirmation from the court clerk. Temporary financial orders approved. Joint accounts frozen pending separation proceedings. Asset preservation measures in effect. All very official, all very legal, all very permanent. Amara had attached a note. Clean work. They can't touch anything until this gets resolved. Expect pushback by noon. At 10:30 a.m., Nua sent me a status update that read like a military operation report. Vendor notifications delivered. Shipment reversals processing. Inventory recalls 73% complete. Credit facilities suspended pending new authorization from primary guarantor. That would be me. She'd included a thank you note from our logistics partner in Brooklyn. Appreciate the clarity on authorization changes. Refreshing to work with someone who communicates expectations clearly. Even the vendors were taking sides. At 11:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Emergency board meeting scheduled. Governance review initiated. Your attendance requested but not required. Sickball Santiago being diplomatic. The minority bloc had done its job. Tristan was about to spend his morning explaining to a room full of investors why his engagement party had triggered a shareholder revolt. But the text that made me actually smile came at 12:30 p.m. from a contact I hadn't heard from in months. Auntie Fion Nana. That's what I called my mother's best friend since I was 7 years old. Even though we weren't related. And she'd moved to Atlanta 10 years ago. She'd been watching the whole drama unfold through the magic of social media and family gossip networks. The message was perfect in its simplicity. A single red heart emoji followed by a pot of soup emoji. No questions, no advice, no are you okay check-ins, just love and the promise of pepper soup the next time I made it down to Georgia. Sometimes the best support comes from people who've known you long enough to understand that you don't need fixing, just witnessing. I packed 2 bags that afternoon, not because I was running away, but because staying in the loft felt like living in a museum of someone else's life. Every piece of furniture, every carefully curated decoration, every Instagram-worthy corner reminded me of conversations about our aesthetic and our brand and our vision for the space. Turns out most of it had been her vision. I'd just been the guy who figured out how to pay for it. I found a short-term rental in a building overlooking Washington Square Park. Clean walls, hardwood floors, a simple desk by the window, and most importantly, a lease that didn't require anyone else's signature. The kind of place where you could think clearly because nothing was trying to make a statement except the view. That evening, I made a list. Called it mine because I worked for them. Expected it to be long, detailed, full of expensive items and complicated assets. Instead, I wrote down 5 things. 1. The coffee roaster I bought myself for Christmas. 2. The books on financial systems and operational design. 3. My mother's ring, the one that never fit Selena's aesthetic. 4. The set of tools I used for the kitchen renovation. 5. The quiet satisfaction of knowing exactly what I built. 5 items. That was it. Everything else was just stuff. Accumulation. The material evidence of a life that had been designed by committee rather than lived by choice. It felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because it meant starting over. Light because it meant starting over. At 8:30 p.m., Hugo buzzed from downstairs. Different building now, different concierge. But the message was familiar. Someone to see me. This time it was Mary Soul, Selena's sister, holding the white leaves I'd left at the party. The flowers looked like they'd been through a war, wilted and bruised from being passed around between venue managers and catering staff and probably a few confused photographers. "She's breaking," Mary Soul said without preamble, holding out the flowers like a peace offering. I took them, not because I wanted them back, but because Mary Soul had driven across town to return something that was already dead. I broke quietly. "Months ago," I said. "I'm only finishing." Mary Soul nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she'd been watching her sister's marriage fall apart from the inside and wondering when someone was finally going to acknowledge what everyone could see. "Is there anything she can do?" Mary Soul asked, "to fix this?" "She can sign the papers." I said, "She can tell the truth. She can take responsibility for her choices. And then we all get to find out what our lives look like when they're not built on pretending that convenient is the same thing as happy." Mary Soul left the flowers and walked away without saying goodbye. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone finish what they started. I put the leaves in a glass of water, not because I thought they'd recover, but because even dying things deserve dignity. Outside my window, Washington Square Park was full of people living their actual lives. Students studying under streetlights. Couples having real conversations on benches. Street musicians playing for tips instead of Instagram stories. Peace, it turns out, is quiet. Accountability is quieter. You know what's beautiful about the truth? It doesn't need a marketing strategy. 1 week later, Selene signed everything. The separation agreement, the repayment plan, and the statement that Quinn had probably rewritten 17 times trying to make it sound less like a confession and more like a mutual decision. It didn't work. The truth has a way of cutting through spin like a knife through tissue paper. Tristan paused his campaign because apparently running a venture capital firm had become a political race in his mind and retreated to focus on investors, which was corporate speak for spend the next 6 months convincing people that my personal life isn't a liability to their money. The board at Hale Meridian adopted Santiago's reputation risk protocol with actual teeth, new rules about public behavior, social media presence, and the radical concept that other people's marriages weren't appropriate venues for hostile takeovers. Chloe Ward downsized to what it actually was instead of what Selena had been pretending it could become. Turns out, when you remove artificial credit facilities and marketing budgets funded by someone else's guarantees, most lifestyle brands become hobby businesses pretty quickly. But here's the thing, it survived. Smaller, more honest, more sustainable. Sometimes the best thing you can do for something you built is stop propping it up and let it find its natural size. I kept my promises. No interviews, no tell-all articles, no victory laps on social media. I went back to my own company, my small team, my ordinary calendar that didn't require anyone else's approval to fill. I woke early, brewed coffee with the good machine, and watched Washington Square Park fill with runners who didn't know my name or my story or the details of my very public, very quiet divorce. Peace, it turns out, is invisible to people who aren't looking for it. People still ask what was in that gift box I left on the table. Reporters mostly and a few business bloggers who think there's some deeper meaning to decode. I tell them the truth, a key and a barcode, a future and a mirror. One opens what's yours, the other shows what you did, but the real gift wasn't what was in the box. The real gift was the door I didn't slam the scene. I didn't make the explanation I didn't know. The real gift was walking away with my dignity intact and my finances documented. True story. And the door they knocked on at midnight. I opened it, listened to what they had to say, and chose not to explain anything that the paperwork already said. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let your work speak for itself. Even when your work is letting go.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the stories. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.